She was declared dead, but her puppy knew the truth. The blizzard had silenced the mountain. Snow blanketed every roof, every road, every hope. When rescue teams pulled the girl from the drift, limbs frozen, breath vanished, they did what they were trained to do. They zipped the bag and radioed it in. But one small heartbeat refused to let go. A trembling puppy, half buried beside her, kept pawing at the paramedic's coat. And then, a twitch. Just a flicker. Her fingers moved. What followed wasn't just a story of survival, it was a story of instinct, love, and a bond that never broke, even after breath was lost. And at the center of it all, a snow-covered German shepherd named Kodiak, who wouldn't let the storm win. The snow had begun its silent siege long before nightfall. But by the time Officer Daniel Rourke turned off the main road and onto the winding, unlit service lane, it no longer fell in flakes, it came sideways. The storm moved like a white wall, angry and relentless, pushing its weight through the thick pine canopy overhead. Eversnow, Montana, had always lived up to its name, but this night was different. Meaner, hungrier. The cruiser's headlights barely cut through the haze. Ice formed in ghostly fingers across the windshield, melting slowly under the heat vents. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles pale beneath black gloves, his breath shallow as it fogged the inside of the car despite the heater blowing full blast. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Kodiak, still and alert, his ears twitching subtly with every groan of the wind. The German shepherd's fur was thick, dark with streaks of rust along his spine, a coat that shimmered when dry, but now clung slightly damp from the earlier patrol check. His eyes, deep amber and always focused forward, reflected something ancient. Daniel had long since stopped trying to explain it to anyone. Kodiak didn't act like a normal patrol dog. He moved like something older, something that had already survived a dozen storms before this one. Daniel shifted in his seat, jaw tight. The snowplows hadn't reached this road yet. Not that they ever did. This stretch, Old Quarry Trail, was more maintenance access than roadway. A few cabins scattered at its farthest end, mostly vacant this time of year. Still, it was protocol to check. But tonight, it wasn't just the snow that unsettled him. It was the quiet, that heavy, unnatural quiet that blanketed everything during a whiteout. A kind of hush, so complete it made your thoughts feel too loud. That was the same kind of silence he remembered from 10 years ago, when a blizzard not unlike this one swallowed his little sister. They'd been hiking just 10 minutes from their family cabin. She was 7. He was 16. She disappeared between 2 trees, swallowed by white. They never found her. He still wore her silver locket tucked inside his duty jacket. Heart-shaped, dented on one side, with a tiny arcade token sealed inside a silly birthday gift that cost him 4 tries and a scraped knuckle. It was all that ever made it back. He blinked, forcing the memory out. The wipers screeched again. Kodiak let out a soft exhale, sensing the shift in him. "I'm okay," Daniel said softly, though he wasn't sure if he meant it for himself or for the dog. "Just the wind messing with my head." The radio crackled faintly, but there was no new dispatch. Everyone else had returned to base. Only Daniel had volunteered for the northern sector. No one wanted to do the graveyard shift in a blizzard. Maybe he liked it that way. Out here, there were no expectations. No awkward silences with people who didn't know what to say when you mentioned your sister. No shallow condolences from coworkers who never knew her name. Just snow, trees, and Kodiak breathing quietly beside him. A living compass that didn't need direction. As the cruiser crawled around a bend, the trees seemed to close in tighter, forming crooked silhouettes through the fogged glass. He slowed further, almost to a crawl. Then he heard it. Or maybe he didn't hear it, that was the problem. The wind had stopped. Abruptly. Not a fade. A full silence. Even the tires, previously crunching over packed snow, now glided soundlessly. The storm, for just a moment, seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's pulse kicked up. A prickle crawled up his spine. Kodiak sat straighter, muscles taut. Then, without warning, the German shepherd stood, eyes locked on the passenger side window, ears fully erect. "What is it?" Daniel whispered. Kodiak didn't bark. He rarely did. Instead, he placed one paw gently on the center console, leaned closer to the glass, and let out a low, guttural hum, not growling, not alerting, just pointing. Daniel knew that sound. He'd only heard it once before, The night Kodiak found a man trapped in a creek bed, half frozen, after a hunting accident. The hum wasn't about danger, it was about urgency. Daniel pulled to a stop. The tires slid just slightly before locking into place. Outside, the snow swirled with hypnotic intent. He reached for his coat, flipped the collar high, and opened the door. The wind returned instantly, stinging his skin like glass slivers. Kodiak jumped out after him, paws hitting the snow softly but with purpose. The dog's nose dropped immediately, sniffing the wind, tail low, body slung forward like a wolf on a trail. "Show me," Daniel said, and Kodiak moved. Not a run, a purposeful, silent trot, curving off the plowed trail into the unmarked snow. Daniel hesitated only for a second before following. Each step sank knee-deep. The wind screamed again, louder now, as if protesting the intrusion. But Kodiak didn't falter. They walked for what felt like a full minute, then 2. Daniel's face stung. His lashes froze. He blinked hard, struggling to see more than a few feet ahead. Then Kodiak stopped. Tail up. Head lowered. Ears forward. A soft chuff escaped his throat. Daniel stepped beside him and followed his gaze. At first, he saw nothing but snow. Mounds, shadows, drifting whiteness. But then, a shape. Small, curled, half-covered. He moved closer. His heart thudded hard. And that's when he saw it. A child, maybe 5 years old, arms wrapped tightly around something small. A puppy. He dropped to his knees, snow biting through his pants. The little girl's face was pale, lips blue, hair plastered to her forehead. Her pink coat was crusted with frost, one boot missing. Her arms trembling but still holding on. Daniel's voice cracked. "Oh God." Kodiak pressed beside them, body curved like a shield. Daniel reached for his radio, but no signal. He looked at Kodiak, then at the girl, then whispered, "We're not losing her. Not tonight." He unzipped his coat, reached out slowly, and as his gloved hands brushed the frost from the girl's face, the puppy blinked. Just once. Still alive, Daniel swallowed hard and began to move. The tires crunched slowly to a halt on the frozen path. Kodiak had stopped moving, not just paused, frozen like something had reached up from the snow and clutched his chest. Daniel noticed it immediately. The big German Shepherd stood a few feet ahead of the patrol car, body low, tail down, ears locked forward like radar. His right forepaw hovered slightly above the snow, trembling with tension. Not a muscle moved, not a sound came from his throat, but his entire posture screamed one thing: something's wrong. Daniel didn't need a bark or a command cue. He already had his hand on the door handle. In a town like Eversnow, you learn to trust silence more than noise, and trust Kodiak more than anyone. He stepped out, boots sinking deep into the crusted snow, and shut the door behind him with a muffled thud. The world outside the cruiser was a different kind of quiet. The storm had thickened. It no longer danced, it pressed. Like a weight, like judgment, the kind of wind that didn't just cut through jackets, but through thought. Kodiak didn't move when Daniel approached. He just shifted his weight slightly. Eyes locked into the swirling white ahead. Then his nostrils flared. "Talk to me, partner," Daniel whispered, crouching low beside him. Kodiak's head turned just briefly. Enough to meet Daniel's eyes. Then he looked forward again and took a single step into the untouched snowbank on the right. That was enough. Daniel followed. The wind caught him in the chest, nearly staggering him backward. He pressed into it, shielding his face with one arm. Snow sliced through the beam of his flashlight in erratic, horizontal streaks. Visibility dropped to a few feet. The trees, barely visible minutes ago, had been swallowed whole. Kodiak kept moving, slow but deliberate, nose low, every footstep precise, as if tracking a ghost he couldn't quite smell. Daniel had worked with other dogs, good dogs, smart ones, but none like Kodiak. Kodiak didn't track with his nose alone. He tracked with his soul. And Daniel had learned painfully, personally, that when Kodiak stopped like that, something was out there. Not always danger, but never nothing. Every few steps, Kodiak would pause, ears pivoting, then adjust his path. Daniel stayed just behind, one hand gripping the flashlight, the other hovering near his belt, not for a weapon, but for balance. The snow was deeper here, wind blown into uneven drifts that tried to suck in his legs. Then came the sound, or rather, the lack of it. No wind, no swirling, just stillness. It hit like a drop in air pressure. Daniel's ears popped. Kodiak stopped again, body stiff, one paw raised. Daniel whispered, "Where?" Kodiak turned slightly and began to drift left, moving off what little path remained into a cluster of snow-laden pines. The branches hung heavy, bowing like old men under the weight of the storm. The silence deepened. Even Daniel's own footsteps seemed muted, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. His heart started to thud, not just from exertion, but from recognition. He'd been in this exact silence before, 10 years ago, the day his sister disappeared. The memory hit like a wave. Her scream had been muffled by snow. Her footprints vanished within minutes. The search dogs had been late. The plows had blocked access to the road. And Daniel had waited alone, cold, until they told him she wasn't coming back. He hadn't believed it then. He still didn't believe it now. Which was why he was here, in this moment, following a dog through a storm most men had chosen to avoid. Because sometimes the storm wasn't the enemy. Sometimes it was the test. Kodiak veered suddenly right and let out a short, sharp bark just once. Daniel's boots slipped slightly as he moved faster, nearly jogging despite the terrain. Kodiak had moved ahead by 10, maybe 15 feet, his body nearly blending into the shadows under the trees. Then he stopped again, nose high, and let out a sound Daniel had only heard twice before in their years together. A kind of moan, not fear, not warning longing. A sound that meant, hurry. Daniel stumbled to catch up. His light swept wildly as the wind returned in a harsh gust. For a moment, he couldn't see. The snow came fast, like a veil being thrown over the world. But then a shape, at the base of a tree, small, curled. He moved closer, and the shape came into view, not just a pile of snow, not a fallen branch, a child. Daniel's stomach dropped, his throat closed. A small figure, pink coat, unmoving, slumped forward into the snow. And clutched tightly in her arms, a puppy, barely a month old. Its tiny form trembled once, then went still again. Daniel dropped to his knees, flashlight landing softly beside him. The beam caught the girl's hair dark, matted, stiff with frost. Her cheek was pressed into the snow, eyes shut, mouth slightly open. The wind tugged at the loose strings of her coat. He couldn't speak for a moment, couldn't even breathe. All he could do was stare and remember. A little girl, in the snow, disappearing. Only this time, he had arrived in time. Kodiak leaned in, pressing his flank against the child's side. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He simply lay down like a sentry, like a promise. Daniel pulled off his gloves with trembling fingers, reached forward. His hand hovered above the girl's back, afraid that if he touched her, she might crumble like frost. But she didn't. Her chest rose just barely. Alive. Daniel's voice cracked. "Stay with me, little one." He gathered her carefully into his arms. She was light, too light. Her face, ghostly, pale, nestled against the puppy's head. He didn't separate them, just wrapped his coat around both, pulled them in tight. Kodiak rose and stood at his side, ready. The wind screamed again, but this time, Daniel didn't listen. He turned, took a breath, and began to run. The wind curled around them like a living thing, howling, clawing, pressing in from all sides. But at the base of that pine tree, where the girl lay curled into herself like something broken but still refusing to let go, there was only stillness. Daniel dropped to his knees, coat already flung open, heart hammering too fast to think. The little girl's body was stiff from the cold, her limbs locked in a protective cocoon around the puppy, so small it barely looked real. Its fur, a patchwork of tan and white, was clumped with ice and crusted snow. One tiny ear twitched. Still alive. So was she. But just barely. Daniel moved as if he were handling spun glass. His gloved hands hovered over the girl's shoulders, uncertain where to touch. He leaned in closer, his voice raw. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" No answer. Her face, angelic and pale beneath wind-matted hair, gave no reaction. But her breath, he could feel it. Faint, intermittent, a ghost of warmth against the icy air. He exhaled slowly, fighting the panic that rose uninvited. Then came Kodiak. Without a word, the big shepherd stepped forward and lay down beside them, his body pressed tight to the girl's back. His chest expanded with each calm, deliberate breath. He didn't nudge, didn't lick. He simply became heat, protection, presence. Daniel drew the emergency blanket from the back of his coat and wrapped it around them both, folding the silver film over her head like a fragile crown. He could feel the tremble of the puppy through her jacket, weak, shallow, instinct clinging to instinct. She hadn't let go of it. Even in the storm, even near death, she'd held on. Daniel whispered, "You're brave, baby girl. You did good." He tucked the blanket tighter, then his coat over that, wrapping them into his chest. The weight of her was too light. Her body sagged like wet fabric. Too young to be this cold. Too small to carry this silence. Kodiak raised his head slightly, brushing his snout along the girl's arm. Then, as if by silent agreement, he moved forward, pressing his body along her length, curved like a crescent, like a barrier against the wind. His warmth radiated into her through layers of frost and cloth. The storm screamed again, hurling snow through the trees. Daniel lowered his forehead against the top of the girl's head and spoke into the tangled strands of her frozen hair. "Hold on, we're not losing you tonight. Not on my watch, not ever." The wind didn't hear him, but Kodiak did. The shepherd let out a low, steady rumble in his chest. Not a growl, something softer. A promise. Daniel repositioned the little girl carefully, holding her and the puppy together in his arms, their bodies wrapped in every layer he could offer. The puppy stirred faintly, its nose pushing beneath the girl's chin as if it knew movement meant safety. He scanned her for signs of injury, nothing obvious. No blood, no bruising, just cold, brutal, merciless cold. She couldn't have survived long out here, not dressed like this. A pink coat thin, torn at one sleeve. One boot missing. No mittens, only a mismatched sock, soaked and darkened with slush. Her cheeks were like porcelain. Lips a soft blue-gray. One eyelash held a crystal of ice that hadn't yet melted. He fought the sting in his own eyes. Somewhere behind the bone-deep calm he wore his armor. Something inside him cracked. She reminded him too much of his sister. The same age, the same hair, the same way the world just seemed to forget that little girls didn't belong alone in the snow. Not again. He couldn't let it happen again. "Kodiak," he choked, glancing at the shepherd. The dog didn't move, didn't blink. He was still as the trees, except for the steam rising in soft clouds from his breath, each one warming the frozen air around the child. Daniel reached into the side pouch of his jacket, pulled out a second emergency blanket, and laid it across Kodiak's back, draping it over the girl's body like a shared shield. The wind fought it, clawing at the corners, but he pressed it down, locking it with his own arms. The puppy let out the softest sound, a whimper that could have been mistaken for the wind. "I know, little guy," Daniel whispered, brushing his fingers gently over the tiny creature's neck. "You held her through this. You kept her here." His eyes dropped to her jacket. Something caught in the zipper. A piece of frayed fabric, hand-stitched pink thread pulling loose. He gently tugged it free. It was a patch, roughly rectangular, with the name Aria sewn in uneven block letters. So now he had a name. He stared down at the bundle in his arms. "Aria," he said softly, letting the name find a place on his tongue. "You're not alone anymore." The forest didn't answer, but it no longer felt as cruel. Kodiak leaned in again and nosed the girl's cheek once. Her fingers, still locked around the puppy, twitched ever so slightly. Daniel gasped. She moved. He adjusted his grip, careful not to break the seal of warmth between them. His legs ached from kneeling in the snow, but he didn't dare stand just yet. The wind had softened for a moment, just enough to give him space to breathe. Aria's eyelids fluttered once, then stilled. But it was enough. A flicker. A fight. He reached for his radio. Static. Still nothing. "We're doing this the hard way then," he muttered. He took one more look at the girl, and the puppy pressed to her chest. At Kodiak, who hadn't shifted a muscle, anchoring them in heat and calm. Then Daniel gathered them both fully into his arms. Aria's head lolled against his shoulder, hair stiff with frost. The puppy pressed against her, wrapped inside his coat now, barely a whisper of breath between them. He turned toward the direction they came from. The path was already half buried. He could barely see the trees anymore. But he didn't hesitate. Kodiak rose beside him, flanking his right-like armor, and together they moved forward, step by heavy step, into the white void that no longer held him hostage. It held hope now. It held Arya, and he wasn't leaving without her. The snow wasn't falling anymore. It was attacking. With Arya pressed tightly to his chest and the puppy tucked inside the folds of his coat, Daniel leaned into the wind like a man pushing through the tide. Each gust struck with the force of a wave, driving needles of ice against his face, slamming against his legs, testing his grip. He didn't loosen it. He couldn't. Arya was so still. Her breath, if it was there at all, came in faint, fluttering pulses against his neck. The puppy, wedged between her body and his chest, trembled with a rhythmic urgency, like its tiny heart refused to give up even when everything else had. Daniel clenched his jaw against the cold, eyes narrowed to slits. He couldn't see the trees anymore, couldn't hear anything but wind. But Kodiak was still beside him. The shepherd moved low and steady, fur flattened by sleet, tail down, body tense with purpose. He veered slightly ahead, carving a narrow path through the waist-deep snow, glancing back every few feet to make sure Daniel followed. Without him, Daniel would have walked in circles. Without Kodiak, he might have stopped. But now he had a name cradled in his arms. A little girl who had fought to survive, who had held on to a puppy like it was the last fire in a frozen world. And she was still warm, still breathing. And he would not let her story end here. "Come on!" he gritted through chattering teeth. "Just a little further!" The weight of her against him wasn't much. She felt lighter than a grocery sack, but the responsibility of her, the fragility, was crushing. Every time she shifted even slightly, his heart seized. Every twitch of the puppy's paw made him whisper, "Stay with me. Just stay." His boots sank deep with every step, the crusted top layer collapsing beneath his weight. His thighs burned. His spine screamed. His fingers had gone numb, but he kept them locked tight, one arm cradling Arya's back, the other shielding her head. Halfway to the cruiser, the wind shifted. Not in direction and tone. A sudden burst struck him in the side. He lost his footing. His boot caught on a buried root or drift, and for one terrifying second, the world tilted. He twisted hard, instinctively shielding Arya with his shoulder as he fell. Crack! Pain exploded down his arm. White-hot, sudden, blinding. The kind of pain that steals breath and thought in one brutal second. He hit the snow with a muffled grunt, his body curling around Arya like a human shell. The puppy whimpered beneath his coat. Daniel bit down on a scream. His left shoulder had taken the full force. It hung useless now. Fire searing through the joint like broken glass. Dislocated, maybe fractured. He couldn't tell. Didn't matter. He wasn't stopping. Kodiak doubled back instantly, snow spraying beneath his paws. The shepherd's body brushed Daniel's face as he circled them once, then let out a single sharp bark urgency, not alarm. Daniel coughed, grit snow from his lips, and pushed himself upright with his right arm, gasping. Every movement made his shoulders shriek, but he didn't care. He adjusted Arya in his arms, locking her higher against his chest. His left arm dangled, limp and throbbing, but he could still hold her with one. Kodiak moved ahead again, slicing a new path, and Daniel followed each step, now a war of will over agony. One foot, then the next. The storm howled louder, furious at being ignored. "I don't care," Daniel growled into the wind. "I'm not losing her, you hear me? I'm not. His voice broke on the last word. He was shivering now, not from fear, but from the brutal draw of adrenaline fading into exhaustion. And then a shape in the distance. 2 orange glows. The cruiser, its parking lights blinked faintly through the swirling snow like a dying lighthouse, half buried in drifts, but still running. Steam rose from the hood. The engine hummed low, muffled by the cold. Relief hit like a punch. "Almost there," he whispered. But the last stretch was the worst. Each step through that final 50 yards felt like walking underwater. The weight of the snow, the weight of the girl, the fire in his shoulder, it all blurred into a tunnel vision where only the lights mattered, only the warmth ahead. Kodiak reached the car first, and turned to wait, snow clinging to his legs, his chest heaving. Daniel stumbled the last 10 feet, knees buckling slightly as he slammed into the door. His fingers scrabbled at the handle, too numb. He screamed not loud, but Primal then used his teeth to pull off one glove, jammed his bare hand against the metal, pulled. The door opened. Warmth burst out like a breath. He climbed inside, cradling Arya and the pup to the back seat. Kodiak jumped in behind him, positioning himself without a command against them, like a living furnace. He curled around the girl, pressed his broad chest into her side, his massive body forming a wall of heat. Daniel wrapped them all in a blanket from the emergency kit. His right arm burned, his left hung limp. Arya didn't stir, but her cheek had color now faint, pink. The puppy stirred, opened one eye, and let out a small whine. Daniel reached forward and touched the girl's forehead. Still cold, but still here. He slumped into the driver's seat, heart hammering, pain radiating in waves. Kodiak met his eyes through the rearview mirror. Daniel nodded, just once. Then he reached for the keys and shifted into gear. The snow was thick on the windshield. The defroster fought it like a weak breath on frosted glass. Wipers screeched. The headlights cut through the white with minimal success. But the road was still there. He'd made it back to the car. Now he just had to get them to safety. The storm hadn't won. Not tonight. The engine hummed low beneath the storm's roar, a fragile heartbeat against the white noise pressing in from all sides. Daniel slammed the cruiser's door shut with the last strength his right arm could offer, then leaned forward over the wheel, breathing hard. The defroster whined. The windshield wipers scraped, squealed, stuttered. The storm outside didn't care. It pushed against the vehicle like a beast made of ice and breath, trying to get inside. Daniel's shoulder throbbed, dislocated. Maybe worse, but he couldn't stop for pain. Not now. Not while the girl in his back seat clung to life with the threadbare strength of a snow-buried flame. He turned to check them. Arya, still curled in his coat and blanket, hadn't moved. Her face remained pale, her lashes coated with half-melted frost. The puppy, still unnamed, still trembling, was nestled beneath her chin, tucked in the crook of her small arm. It let out the faintest sound, a whimper, almost too soft to hear. And Kodiak, steady, breathing, present, had wrapped his body around them both, like he belonged there. He didn't look at Daniel, didn't move, just kept his chest pressed against Arya's side, the heat of his body a silent shield. Daniel exhaled shakily, then turned back to the dashboard. He reached for the radio mic, pressed the button. Unit 12 to dispatch. Coming. Static. He adjusted the frequency, tapped the antenna switch on the dash. Nothing. Unit 12. Priority emergency. I've got a child, female, 5 or 6, hypothermic. Also a puppy, minimal responsiveness. En route to St. Marin's and Splank. Silence answered him. The kind that feels personal. He reached for his phone. No bars. Just a red X where signal should have been. He swore under his breath. Not loudly, just a defeated sound that landed heavy in the tight space of the cab. With his good arm, he twisted the temperature dial until it clicked into full red. The vents groaned. Heat pushed forward, weak but rising. Daniel took off his gloves and rubbed his hands together hard. His fingers stung from thawing. Blood flow returned in burning bursts. He looked again at the mirror. Kodiak's eyes met his. Steady, ready. We hold the line, Daniel said softly. Just like always. The cruiser crawled forward through the storm. Headlights carved a narrow tunnel through swirling white, and beyond that, there was nothing. No shape, no sound, no road markings. The tires bumped along what he hoped was still pavement. Visibility, maybe 10 feet. Every turn of the wheel felt like a guess. Every breath from Arya a prayer. He kept glancing at the girl, checking her face in the rearview mirror like it was the only compass left. Her cheeks, still so pale, her hands, unmoving. But the puppy stirred now and then, just enough to keep hope alive. Just hang on, he whispered. You're not going to fade away in the dark. Not you. Kodiak let out a low chuff, a sound of agreement, or maybe defiance. Daniel pressed the gas pedal just a little harder. Snow flurried across the windshield like ash. The heater began to catch up with the cold fog lifting slowly from the glass, inch by inch. The girl didn't stir, but she didn't slump further either. Daniel took that as a victory. He passed a snow-covered road sign, unreadable, just a shape swallowed in white. He knew this stretch by memory, had driven it 100 times. There was a curve ahead, then a dip, and then the turnpike that led toward the hospital. If he missed it, he'd hit the ravine. He slowed, squinting into the storm, leaning forward like it would help him see through the whiteout. Kodiak's head lifted. Something in the girl shifted. Daniel's pulse quickened. He tapped the brakes. The car skidded slightly, fishtailing before catching traction. The road dipped. He gripped the wheel harder. And then, just ahead, barely visible, a flash of orange. A snow marker. He was still on the road. His breath came out in a single, harsh sigh. His good arm ached. His injured one had gone numb, slung close to his body like dead weight. 3 more miles, he said aloud, voice rasped from the cold. 3 more, and we're there. The puppy let out a faint sneeze. Arya shifted slightly, just her hand, curling tighter around the small body in her arms. Daniel caught it in the mirror. That tiny motion. And he broke. Just for a second. He blinked hard, eyes stinging from more than wind. One gloved hand lifted to his mouth. A breath caught in his throat, raw, jagged, honest. Because that small motion meant she was still fighting. And he knew that kind of fight. He'd lived it, slept with it, carried it in the scar of memory for 10 long years. He wouldn't let her carry it alone. He reached across to the passenger seat, grabbed the folded emergency reflective blanket, and twisted to drape it over Kodiak and Arya. The shepherd didn't flinch. He simply lowered his head onto the girl's thigh and exhaled softly. Daniel turned back, shifted gears, and nudged the cruiser forward again. The tires groaned. The storm didn't ease, but the road was there, still. And that was enough. Inside the cab, the heater clicked louder, warm air finally pushing back the cold. The temperature gauge ticked 1 notch to the right. Daniel whispered it again this time, not as an order, but as a vow. Hold on, The automatic doors hissed open with a reluctant groan as Daniel barreled through them, his breath coming in short, burning bursts. His boots struck the slick tile floor of the ER lobby, leaving behind a trail of packed snow and desperation. In his arms, Arya, wrapped in his duty coat, swaddled in a silver emergency blanket, her tiny face poked through layers of warmth, like a porcelain doll left out in winter. The puppy barely clinging to life was cradled against her chest, his body limp but not lifeless. Daniel held them both, as if the world might try to take them back. "Kodiak!" he barked behind him without turning. The German shepherd followed, pacing close on Daniel's heels with the composure of a soldier. His coat, soaked and frosted, shimmered under the hospital's harsh fluorescent lights. Snow clung to his legs. His eyes stayed locked on Arya. A receptionist half rose from behind the counter. Words began to form on her lips. "Emergency intake," Daniel called, voice low but sharp. "Child 5, maybe 6 hypothermia. Puppy in shock, both unresponsive but breathing. I need a trauma room now." Within seconds, the air changed. A side door burst open. Out came Dr. Eleanor Finch, tall, lean, white hair tied in a low braid, her expression carved from years of bad news and worse nights. She didn't rush. She moved with the kind of speed that came from certainty. Behind her trailed Nurse Quinn Harper, a young woman with auburn hair and quick hands, already snapping on gloves as they walked. Dr. Finch's eyes locked on the bundle in Daniel's arms. "Vitals?" she asked, curt but calm. "Pulse faint but there. Body temp by touch, dangerously low. Breathing shallow. No external wounds. Puppy is unresponsive but twitching. Looks hypothermic too." Dr. Finch didn't waste time. "Trauma room 2. Quinn, get the warming unit prepped. Notify NICU to stand by for a child under extreme exposure. I want a bear hugger, warm IVs, and forced air on standby." "On it," Quinn replied, already wheeling a gurney around the corner. Daniel stepped forward and gently laid Arya down onto the gurney, fingers lingering for just a second too long on her forehead. She didn't stir. The puppy gave a twitch, a soft whimper lost beneath the beeps and footsteps that filled the hallway. Kodiak stopped at the doorway, his eyes never leaving her. "Sir, you'll need to wait outside," Quinn said softly, her voice far gentler than her hands. which were moving at near surgical speed. "She needs him," Daniel said, motioning toward the shepherd. Dr. Finch turned, finally seeing the full picture. She hesitated not long, but enough to show she was weighing the logic against something less measurable. "You'll vouch for his behavior?" she asked. "I trust him more than I trust myself." She nodded once. "Then he stays. Corner of the room. No movement unless I say." Daniel exhaled, tension breaking like thawing ice. As they wheeled Arya down the hall, Daniel followed behind, Kodiak walking so close their shoulders nearly touched. Room 2 was already lit like daylight. Machines beeped to life. A warming pad hissed softly beneath the sheets. Quinn moved like she'd trained for this exact moment. The girl's body looked even smaller on the gurney, lost beneath layers of blankets and tubing. Quinn peeled back Daniel's coat and the emergency wrap, working swiftly to preserve modesty while exposing skin for monitoring. Daniel winced as cold air hit the girl's limbs. Her skin was white blue, her toes stiff, but not yet gray. That was something. That meant time hadn't run out yet. "Core body temp is..." Quinn paused as she read the numbers. 24.6 Celsius? Amdus? Daniel's stomach twisted. "We'll bring her up slowly," Dr. Finch said, already attaching warm saline. "Too fast and we risk arrhythmia. Keep her flat. Maintain humidified oxygen." She turned to Daniel. "You found her like this?" "Yes. Curled around the pup. No mittens. One boot gone. Wasn't breathing at first, or maybe I couldn't tell." "She's a fighter," Finch murmured, adjusting a setting. 5 more minutes out there. You'd be carrying a body." Daniel swallowed hard. His good arm throbbed from effort. His dislocated one hung limply, forgotten in the chaos. "And the dog? The pup?" he asked, looking down. Quinn had already wrapped it in a heated pad, monitoring its pulse. It was barely responsive, but breathing. "Vet tech's on call. But for now, we stabilize what we can. This little guy might have saved her life." Daniel blinked hard. Or she saved his. Across the room, Kodiak had sat himself just beside the bed. He didn't whine, didn't bark, just stared. Quiet, alert, present. He didn't need words. Dr. Finch stepped back from the girl, removing her gloves. "We're past the first danger window. Her heart's holding rhythm. Now we pray she warms evenly." Daniel nodded, his breath shallow. Quinn approached gently. "Are you okay? Your arm..." "Dislocated. I'll manage." "You need to be looked at." "Later." Quinn didn't press. She handed him a cup of lukewarm water instead. Daniel stood beside Kodiak, one hand resting just above the dog's spine. The room was full of clicks and murmurs, machines and soft commands, but to him, it felt like a church, a place where something sacred had just barely held on. He looked down at Arya. Her hair had begun to thaw. A single drop of melted ice rolled down her temple, like a tear she couldn't cry. "I got you here," he whispered. "Now it's your turn." Kodiak leaned slightly into his leg, and Daniel stayed silent, still, and praying, without a sound. The warmth was subtle at first. Not a blaze, not a rush, just a slow reclaiming of space. The room had shed its sterility in favor of human heat. From the bear hugger pads inflating gently beneath Arya's tiny frame, from the humidified oxygen tubing coiled softly across her cheeks, from the pale golden fluid now dripping steadily from warmed IV bags into the narrow vein in her arm. Dr. Eleanor Finch moved with quiet authority at the foot of the bed, her gloved hands calm but never still. Every motion was deliberate, economical. 30 years in trauma medicine had taught her how to move like time was blood. Nurse Quinn Harper worked from the opposite side, adjusting monitors, sliding the pulse oximeter into place. She glanced at the numbers with a tight jaw, then looked over at Daniel. "Still low," she murmured. "But rising." Daniel stood near the corner, just inside the circle of fluorescent light, his body aching and clothes soaked through. His left shoulder had gone stiff pain, humming like a trapped hornet beneath the surface, but he refused to sit. He wasn't here for himself. He was here for her. Arya lay still beneath the silver foil blanket, which reflected the glow of the monitors like shifting moonlight. Her skin, though pale, had moved a single notch back from blue. Her hands, once frozen claws, had relaxed slightly, the fingers still curled protectively around nothing, Leo having been gently lifted from her arms moments earlier. The puppy had been taken by Quinn to the emergency vet tech bay just down the hall. He had twitched once, let out a soft squeak, and nestled deeper into the thermal pad before Quinn whispered something to him, something Daniel couldn't hear, and carried him away like a child too small for the world. "Pup's in good hands," she'd said. Same as her. Now, Daniel could only watch. And Kodiak, faithful as ever, remained at Arya's side, curled tightly against the length of her torso, flank rising and falling in steady rhythm. His nose touched the edge of the blanket near her shoulder, and his body provided something no machine could: real heat, living presence. Dr. Finch had allowed it with a single nod, but only after a pause, after Daniel had said quietly, but with a force that couldn't be measured in decibels, "She needs him. Please." And Eleanor, who had once stood over the still body of her own husband pulled from a mountain slide, understood what it meant to need something that breathes beside you. So Kodiak stayed. Now, the girl's eyelashes fluttered once. Then stillness. Dr. Finch didn't miss it. "Good," she murmured. Neurological response starting. "Let's not rush her awake, though. She's fighting," Daniel whispered. Finch nodded. "They always do. Kids fight like hell when they're given a reason." Daniel's throat tightened. He looked at Kodiak, then back at Arya. "She had one. That puppy." Finch glanced at him then, not as a doctor, but as a person. "Maybe she has another one now." Quinn re-entered moments later, gloves fresh, her face still carrying that open softness, unique to those who'd been through the worst and stayed kind anyway. "Pup's warming up," she said. "Temps at 34.4. Heart's irregular, but holding. I'll keep him under observation for the next hour." Daniel let out a slow breath. "He'll want her," he said. "He'll get her. Just not yet." There was a moment of stillness in the room, then not silence, but stillness, a breathing, living stillness that held all three of them in its hands. The child between life and recovery, the officer holding himself upright on a shattered shoulder, and the shepherd who hadn't left the girl's side since the forest. Dr. Finch finished a round of vitals and stepped back. "We've stabilized her temp at 28.7, she said. "We'll hold her here until 32 before transferring to recovery." "Will she?" Daniel didn't finish the question. "She's not out of the woods," Finch said, "but she's no longer alone in them." Daniel swallowed hard. Then Quinn walked over and handed him something. A strip of pink flannel, frayed at the edges. The fabric was stiff, stained slightly, but stitched in bright thread were the letters, Area. "We found it sewn inside her coat," she said gently. "Now you know her name for sure." He nodded, slowly folding the strip into his palm. "It suits her." He walked closer to the bed, stopped just short of touching her. "You held on," he whispered. "You held him. You didn't let go." Arya didn't respond, but her pulse monitor ticked slightly higher. And Kodiak, who had watched this whole thing in silence, closed his eyes, just for a moment. His chest rose once in a deep inhale, then fell. Dr. Finch checked her chart and murmured, "Now we wait." Daniel didn't sit. He just stood in the warmth. The girl before him, the shepherd beside her, and the girl's name stitched into his shaking hand. Somewhere down the hallway, the wind rattled against the hospital's glass doors. But in room 2, hope had begun to thaw. The hallway just outside trauma room 2 was dimly lit, lined with outdated pamphlets and fading photographs of smiling families no one ever looked at. The kind of corridor where time didn't move forward or back, it just hovered, waiting. Daniel sat on a molded plastic bench near the vending machine, his shoulders rounded inward, left arm in a makeshift sling, chest rising in short, fatigued intervals. His damp patrol jacket clung to him like a second skin. Every part of him was cold, except for the space just over his heart where the flannel name strip still sat, folded like a prayer. Arya. Kodiak lay on the floor by the door, paws outstretched, ears half raised. The dog had been reluctant to leave Arya's side, but obeyed Daniel's whisper. Still, his eyes didn't blink much. They stayed trained on the door, as if his presence alone could keep her heart beating. Daniel didn't speak. Not yet. Then the door creaked open, and Dr. Eleanor Finch stepped out. Her blue scrubs bore faint flecks of drying saline, her hands still gloved with a fine dust of antiseptic powder. Her silver hair, pinned back earlier, had loosened around the temples. She looked not tired, but softened, like someone who had held too many fragile things in her hands today and was trying not to let any of them drop. "She's warming steadily," she said. "No seizures. Reflexes intact." Daniel exhaled into his fingers. "Thank God." "Maybe," Eleanor replied, folding her arms. "Or maybe it's just the stubbornness children are born with, and we spend our whole lives trying to earn back." Daniel offered a tired smile. Then, without prompting, Eleanor sat beside him, not doctor to officer, but person to person. For a long moment, neither said a word. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt earned. "I lost someone in the snow, too," she said at last, almost to herself. Daniel turned toward her, saying nothing. "Waiting. My husband," she added. "Jared. We were on a trail near Glacier Peak. It was supposed to be a half-day hike, sunlight, maps, the works, but the weather shifted quicker than they said. It always does, doesn't it?" Daniel nodded. His eyes drifted to a patch of melted snow beneath his boots. "One moment, we were arguing about which ridge had the better view. The next, he was gone." Her voice didn't crack. It didn't need to. The strength of it was the grief she'd long since made peace with. "They told me it was likely instant. The avalanche hit from the left side. I don't remember the sound, just the color, white and louder than thunder." Daniel's throat felt like gravel. Eleanor glanced down at Kodiak. "I didn't have kids. We tried once, but it never happened. After Jared, I stopped trying." She looked at Daniel. The silence at home was louder than the mountain. Daniel didn't respond right away. He reached down, absently resting his hand on Kodiak's back. "I had a sister," he said softly. "Maggie. Younger by 6 years. Same kind of storm as this one when we were kids." Eleanor listened, eyes forward. No interruption. "We were sledding too far down the ridge. I turned my back for maybe 10 seconds. Just 10. His jaw clenched. "By the time I heard her scream, I couldn't see her anymore. The snow kept falling. It buried the trail. The hallway seemed to pulse with stillness. She didn't make it," Daniel continued. "And I've never—" He paused, breath-catching. "I've never forgiven myself for surviving." Eleanor didn't offer cliches. "No, it wasn't your fault." No hollow affirmations. Instead, she asked, "How long did you search?" "Until my legs gave out." "Then don't question the part of you that lived." That silence returned, but this time it felt softer, warmer. Just then, the elevator chimed. Quinn Harper stepped out, cradling a clipboard and a cup of lukewarm coffee. She saw them and approached, eyes flicking between the two. "I should have brought 3 cups," she said. "I'm good," Daniel murmured. Quinn looked at him a beat longer, then slid down the wall to sit cross-legged on the tile just beside Kodiak. She sipped, then stared at nothing for a moment. "I had a son," she said quietly. "His name was Micah." Daniel's brow rose. He hadn't expected it. Eleanor stilled. "He was born with a heart defect. They told me at 16 weeks it was likely fatal, but I carried him anyway. Made it to delivery." She swallowed. "He lived 17 days. Kodiak moved toward her slightly, sniffed her wrist, and laid his head on her lap. "I didn't know how to be anything but sad after that," she whispered. "So I went into nursing. Turns out when your heart's already broken, you're not afraid of breaking it again for someone else." Daniel blinked hard. He didn't speak. In that hallway, in that flickering half-light filled with whispered wounds, something unspoken stitched itself between them. Not sympathy, not pity. Recognition. The kind of quiet knowing that passes between those who have learned how to walk through life with their broken parts, arranged just right, so no one notices the limp. Daniel finally broke the stillness. "Thank you, both of you." Eleanor nodded once. "We don't save everyone, Daniel. But tonight, you did." Quinn added gently, "And she's not the only one." Daniel looked down. In his lap, the pink flannel strip lay unfolded now, Aria, catching the light. Kodiak let out a breath, low, content, still watching the door. Inside, behind that door, a little girl was warming. A puppy was stabilizing. And maybe, just maybe, a man was beginning to forgive himself. It started with the faintest twitch. Just a subtle movement in her fingers, small, almost imperceptible, but for a child who had once lain still as snow, it was everything. Inside the softly lit recovery room, monitors beeped at steady intervals, measuring progress in delicate increments. Arya's frail body lay swaddled in heated blankets and soft cotton layers. The bear hugger machine hummed gently, pushing waves of warmth through her limbs, while an oxygen mask rested over her face, fogging slightly with each breath she fought to take. Dr. Eleanor stood near the vitals monitor, her arms folded tightly across her chest, eyes never leaving the numbers. Quinn sat at the foot of the bed, murmuring soft encouragements not meant to be heard, just felt. And Daniel stood silently in the corner, as if afraid that breathing too loudly might scare the life back out of her. Then it happened again. A slight flinch of her eyelid, a curling of her hand. Quinn leaned in. "Arya?" she whispered. Her eyelids trembled, then parted slightly, revealing two eyes dull from exhaustion but flickering, just barely, with life. A slow breath hitched in her throat, and the monitor responded with a soft upward shift in rhythm. Eleanor moved first, checking reflexes with a gentle brush of the penlight. Arya blinked, winced at the brightness, then turned her face away, not from pain, but from instinct. "She's waking," Eleanor said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. And for a woman who'd made a life out of realism, there was a thin sheen of hope in her voice. Arya stirred again, her lips parting just enough to form a shape. Daniel stepped forward. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe." Her eyes moved toward the sound, faintly, uncertain. Quinn leaned closer. "Can you tell us your name?" The little girl swallowed. Her lips quivered. Then a whisper hoarse, broken, but whole escaped her mouth. "Leo." Everyone stilled. Quinn turned toward Eleanor, who nodded once, and then she moved swiftly from the room. Daniel approached the bedside slowly, kneeling down. "Is Leo your puppy?" Arya's head barely shifted in a nod. The faintest tear slipped from the corner of her eye, vanishing into the soft fleece blanket. A minute later, Quinn returned with a warm bundle cradled against her chest. The puppy, tiny and wrapped in flannel, blinked slowly. A small IV line still ran from his paw, taped delicately with a child's cartoon bandage. But he was alive. When Arya saw him, her breath caught. Quinn brought Leo gently to the side of the bed and placed him near Arya's chest. The moment his nose touched her arm, the puppy let out the softest whine barely audible. Arya's eyes widened. Her arm, slow and trembling, reached out, fingers brushing through his fur. "Leo," she whispered again, and this time her voice didn't shake. "I didn't let go." Neither did he. Daniel felt something shift inside him, like a thaw breaking open in his own chest. He looked toward the door Kodiak had stepped in, silent as ever. His large frame filled the doorway, eyes scanning the room. The shepherd's tail was still, but his gaze settled on the girl. And then Arya's free hand lifted, reaching out toward Kodiak. Without hesitation, the dog moved. Calm, certain. His paws patted softly on the linoleum as he stepped beside the bed. He didn't bark, didn't tilt his head in confusion. He simply leaned his massive body closer until his fur brushed against the child's arm. She pressed her palm to his head, fingers sinking into his warm coat. A smile formed, not big, not perfect, but real. Eleanor, standing at the monitors, exhaled slowly and allowed herself a moment to close her eyes. Kodiak rested his chin gently on the mattress, letting out a slow, grounding sigh. "Good boy," Arya whispered, her voice almost too soft to catch. Quinn wiped her cheek without a word, and Daniel just watched a child who had nearly disappeared into the cold reach for life again, tethered by the warmth of fur and faith. He looked down at Kodiak, who hadn't moved since laying his head beside her. Not even when Leo shifted and curled tighter into Arya's side. There was something sacred about the moment. Not loud, not miraculous in any theatrical way, but soft, human, healing, like life returning through breath and heartbeat, and the comfort of not being alone. Daniel stepped back to give her space. "We'll find your mom, Arya," he said softly. "I promise." Her eyes closed again. But this time, not in retreat. It was rest, safe rest. As the machines continued their steady chorus and the snowstorm raged beyond the hospital walls, a quiet warmth settled inside the room. One little girl, one tiny pup, and a big shepherd with eyes that had seen too much but never stopped believing. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel Rourke didn't feel like he'd failed someone. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd finally been in time. Morning broke slowly over Eversnow. The blizzard had finally loosened its grip, leaving behind a quiet hush, like the world itself was holding its breath. Light filtered through the frosted hospital window in soft hues of blue and gray, casting a gentle glow over the recovery room. Inside, warmth had returned not just from the machines, or the blankets, or the hum of heated air, but from presence, from life. Arya was no longer motionless. She lay propped up slightly on a soft incline. Layers of fabric cocooned around her small frame. A child's oxygen mask now rested on her pillow, no longer needed. Her skin, once pale as ice, had begun to flush with faint traces of pink. But what changed most was her eyes. They were open now, awake, searching. Kodiak remained curled on the floor beside her bed, head resting against the frame like a silent sentinel. Leo, tucked gently beside her beneath a layer of quilted warmth, raised his head at the faintest movement and let out a soft yawn. Daniel sat nearby, his jacket draped over the back of a chair, his uniform slightly rumpled from a night without sleep. But his posture was alert, watching, waiting. Arya's fingers moved first, small, careful strokes through the puppy's fur. She hadn't spoken in hours, only blinked and drifted in and out of awareness. But now, she stirred again, this time, more purposefully. Her lips parted. "Is he okay?" she whispered. Daniel leaned in. "You mean Leo?" She nodded, slow and hesitant, her voice barely a breath. "He's okay," Daniel assured her gently. "The vet here took care of him. He's stronger than he looks." At that, a ghost of a smile appeared on her lips. She turned her head toward the puppy, fingers still resting over his side. "He stayed with me," she murmured. "He never left." Daniel felt his throat tighten. He looked down at Kodiak, who met his eyes for just a moment, then returned his gaze to the girl, tail thumping once soft and restrained. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was sacred. The kind of quiet that comes after survival, when words are few but needed. Daniel reached for the edge of the hospital blanket to tuck it in gently, and that's when he noticed something, a thread of color along the inner lining of her tiny jacket, half folded at the edge of the bed. He lifted it carefully. Inside, just above the heart, a name had been stitched into the soft purple fabric in faded pink thread. Arya. Not printed, not typed, hand-sewn. With care, Daniel exhaled slowly, as if the storm inside him had finally begun to settle too. "Your name," he said softly, brushing the embroidery with a gloved finger. "It's Arya, right?" The little girl blinked, then gave a single nod. "That's a beautiful name," Daniel said. "Arya, like a song." "M?" Her voice cracked slightly. "My daddy said that too." Quinn, who had entered silently a few moments earlier with a tray of warm broth, paused in her steps. Arya continued, almost in a trance. "He used to play the piano, said I was the music in the quiet part." Daniel swallowed hard. He crouched beside her bed now, careful to be at her level. "And your mom?" Arya blinked, her eyes darkening for a second. "She sings, but she didn't come with us. She said to stay, to wait." Daniel's hands instinctively curled into fists against his knees. He kept his voice calm. "Do you remember where she was?" Arya's brows knitted. "There was fire. Loud noises. Leo barked and barked. Then we ran. It got cold. But I held him close. I told him we just had to sleep a little. And he stayed." She turned her eyes toward Daniel, wide with a child's honesty. "He never left." Daniel nodded slowly, his chest tight. "No, sweetheart," he said. "He didn't." Quinn set the tray down gently on the side table and approached, kneeling next to Kodiak. "Do you feel hungry, Arya?" she asked softly. "Even just a little?" Arya didn't answer at first, but her eyes lingered on the bowl of broth. Slowly, she nodded again. Quinn lifted a small spoon, letting it cool before gently guiding it to her lips. The warmth surprised her. She sipped once, then again. "I didn't think I'd get warm again," Arya whispered. Daniel sat down in the chair this time, his hands resting on his knees. "You're safe now," he said. "You don't have to be cold anymore." A long silence passed. broken only by the soft breathing of the two dogs at her side. Then Arya said, almost to herself, "I think he was cold too, before he found me." Daniel furrowed his brow. "Who?" She reached down, brushing Kodiak's ear. "Him," she said simply. Daniel looked at Kodiak, who lifted his head slightly at the touch. There was something in Arya's tone gentle, but filled with a child's strange, intuitive wisdom, as if she saw something in Kodiak that most adults missed. She lay back again, her energy fading, but her voice steady. "He was looking for something, like me. Maybe we found each other." Daniel didn't reply right away. He only leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and whispered so only Kodiak could hear. "Yeah, kid, maybe we all did." Outside, the wind had stilled. Inside, for the first time in a long time, the room was full of something rare and precious: peace. The trees grew denser as Daniel guided the patrol SUV through the winding, snow-glazed road. The storm had passed, but the cold remained sharp, a reminder of how thin the line was between life and loss. Kodiak sat in the passenger seat, alert as always, eyes fixed forward as if he, too, understood the weight of this drive. Tucked safely in the back seat, Arya was fast asleep, bundled in a thick fleece blanket Quinn had given her. Leo, the tiny puppy, dozed beside her. Daniel had hesitated at first, wondering if this was too soon, but then he remembered Arya's soft voice in the hospital, the way she clung to that dog, and how her first lucid words had been about him. It wasn't logic that made the choice. It was trust, instinct, the kind that doesn't need to be explained, only followed. The address stitched inside her backpack led to a dirt road near the foot of Mount Ellis, winding through tall evergreens now weighed down by snow. The GPS had stopped working miles back. Daniel relied on memory and terrain, gut and grit, the same way he'd tracked people before. When the cabin came into view, it was nearly hidden by the forest. Modest, weather-beaten. A lone wisp of smoke from the chimney betrayed the signs of life inside. He pulled to a stop. Kodiak was out first, stepping cautiously under the crusted snow. Daniel followed, lifting Arya gently in his arms. She stirred, eyes fluttering open, confusion giving way to recognition when she saw the trees. "We're home?" she asked softly, her voice a dry rasp. Daniel nodded. "Almost." He carried her to the porch. Kodiak knocked once against the doorframe with his paw, a habit Daniel had never taught him. Inside, movement. Then the sound of a lock clicking. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Ava Monroe was younger than Daniel expected, maybe early 30s, but her eyes looked older, worn thin by fear and time. Her dark hair was disheveled, cheeks hollow, lips chapped. She wore a heavy knit sweater, mismatched socks, and eyes that hadn't stopped searching the woods since the night her daughter vanished. At first, she just stared, disbelieving. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Then, her eyes fell on the child in Daniel's arms, and she collapsed. Not from injury, not from weakness, but from a tidal wave of something that crashed so fast it knocked the breath from her lungs. Daniel stepped forward instinctively, catching her with one hand, lowering Arya gently to the porch before kneeling beside Ava. "She's alive," he said softly. "She's cold and tired, but she's alive." Ava's hands trembled as she crawled forward on her knees, reaching out. Arya sat up now, eyes wide and wet. "Mama?" The word shattered the stillness. Ava let out a noise, half sob, half gasp, and gathered the child into her arms. She clutched her so tightly Daniel feared she'd break, but Arya didn't protest. She burrowed in. "I looked for you," Ava whispered over and over, her voice raw and hoarse. "I screamed your name until I had no voice left. I thought. Arya clung tighter. "I didn't let go of Leo. I promised I'd wait." Ava kissed her head, her forehead, her frozen little hands. "You're so brave. My girl, my baby." Daniel stepped back, giving them space, watching Kodiak sit beside Leo, the puppy now nestled between their paws. The big shepherd licked the little one once, slow and deliberate. Only then did Ava look up at Daniel, eyes shining with a mother's fury and gratitude woven tight. How did you find her?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "I didn't. Kodiak did. Ava looked at the dog. For a long moment, she simply stared, tears streaking her cheeks. Then she whispered, "Thank you," to him, as if he were human. To Kodiak, it was enough. Daniel cleared his throat gently. "There's more you should know. The storm, the temperature. She shouldn't have survived out there. Not without shelter." "She didn't have shelter," Ava said, voice cracking. "We got separated in the dark. I went back for supplies. She must have followed Leo." "She was nearly gone," Daniel said quietly. "But she never let go of him. And he never stopped pressing against her. He gave her heat." Ava looked at the puppy now, her hand trembling as she stroked his tiny ears. "Then he saved her life." "They saved each other," Daniel said. Silence returned, thick but warm. Arya tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Can Kodiak come in too?" Ava turned to Daniel. "Of course, all of you." Inside the cabin, the fire was rekindled. Soup reheated. Blankets pulled close. And for the first time in what must have felt like an eternity, a mother held her daughter not in grief, but in warmth. Outside, Kodiak lay near the door, tail swishing slowly, head tilted toward the crackling hearth. And Daniel, sitting near the fire with a cup of tea in his hand, finally allowed himself to breathe again. The snow had slowed to a quiet whisper by the time Ava's truck pulled into the circular driveway of St. Maron's Medical Center. The frost still clung to the branches like frozen lace, and the wind no longer howled it breathed. Daniel stood at the glass doors, arms crossed, watching her through the shifting veil of dusk. Inside, the warmth was clinical white-tiled floors, beeping monitors, murmurs behind curtains. But out there, in that fading blue of winter evening, something real stirred. Ava stepped out of the truck with shaky legs, clutching a small blanket in her hands, the one Arya had been wrapped in the night she vanished. It was faded now, the edges fraying, but Daniel saw the way her fingers curled around it like a lifeline. Her face looked different in the soft hospital lights, less like a mother on the brink of collapse, and more like someone coming up for air after being held under too long. As the automatic doors slid open, she stepped through. He didn't move to meet her. He didn't speak. He just watched. She didn't see him at first. Her eyes searched with that primal urgency only a mother knows, sweeping past nurses, past reception, until they landed on the door marked Pediatric Room 2. Quinn was already waiting there, holding it open. Ava walked faster. Then she stopped. Inside the room, Kodiak lay curled gently around the bed, his big frame warm and quiet like a silent guardian. On the bed, Arya sat propped against a soft pillow, a warm IV in her arm, cheeks now pinked with life. Leo the puppy rested in her lap, snuggled into her chest. Her tiny fingers stroked his fur absent-mindedly, as if she was still somewhere between dream and memory. When she looked up and saw her mother, something in the child's face broke wide open. "Mama?" It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a cry. It was a declaration. Ava's knees buckled, but she didn't fall. She ran. The blanket slipped from her hands and floated to the tile floor. She reached the bedside and gathered Arya into her arms, not caring about the IV, not caring about the monitors or the wires or the hospital rules. She held her daughter the way only a mother can, with both desperation and reverence, the way you hold something you thought you'd never touch again. Arya buried her face in her mother's neck and breathed in deeply. "I waited," she whispered. "Leo stayed, and then the big dog found me." Ava pulled back just enough to look into her daughter's face. "You're so strong, baby," she said through tears. "You're the bravest girl in the world." Daniel turned away then, not out of coldness, but out of quiet. This moment didn't belong to him, but Kodiak lifted his head. His eyes followed Daniel's movements with the kind of gaze that held no questions, only presence. Daniel found a bench near the window. He sat, exhaling for what felt like the first time in days, maybe longer. His shoulders still throbbed faintly, where the bone had shifted during that fall in the snow. But that wasn't the ache that consumed him. It was something older, something deeper. He didn't even realize Eleanor had come to stand beside him until she spoke. "She's going to be all right," the older doctor said softly. "Your girl's safe." "She's not my girl," Daniel said reflexively. But his voice cracked. Eleanor didn't argue. She just sat beside him. After a moment she said, There's more than one way to save a life. Sometimes, just being there when nobody else is, that's enough. He nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the room across the hallway. Through the window, he saw Kodiak nudge Ava's hand gently, a silent greeting. Ava looked down and smiled through tears, brushing her fingers along the dog's ears with the same reverence she had for her daughter. Daniel closed his eyes. It had been years since he let himself feel this. Anything, really. Ever since the accident. Ever since he lost his brother on that highway patrol call gone wrong. Guilt had been the only thing left in the empty room of his chest. But now, he felt something shift. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was the possibility of it. The door to Arya's room opened slightly. Quinn peeked out, caught Daniel's eye, and gave him the smallest nod, the kind of look that said, "She asked for you." Daniel stood slowly. He walked to the doorway, Kodiak trailing just behind. Ava looked up as he stepped inside. Their eyes met. No words. But they didn't need them. She took his hand in both of hers, held it for a moment. "Thank you," she said. Daniel's voice was rough. "She held on." "She did," Ava whispered. "Because someone came." Kodiak climbed back onto the bed beside Arya, resting his big head next to Leo, who gave a tiny puppy sigh. Arya patted both gently, whispering something into their fur that only dogs could hear. Daniel didn't interrupt. He just stood there and let himself feel the warmth coming back. The snow had not melted, but the cold no longer seemed cruel. It was nearly a week after the storm when the doctors finally agreed Arya was strong enough to go home. Not fully recovered, her lungs still rasped when she breathed too deeply. And her steps were careful, but her color had returned. And her voice, once a whisper of a girl lost in frost, now filled the hospital room with the cautious curiosity only a child could bring. Daniel stood by the exit doors of St. Maron's Medical Center, his jacket zipped to the chin, one hand resting gently on Kodiak's harness. Ava buttoned the last snap of Arya's coat, while Quinn Harper adjusted the red knit sweater on Leo, a gift from one of the elderly women who lived near the hospital, knitted in a single night after hearing about the puppy who kept her warm. The sweater was too big. It slid down over Leo's eyes as he walked, making him trip every few steps. But he didn't mind. Wherever Arya went, he followed a wobbling dot of red against the snow. The drive back to Ava's cabin was quiet. Daniel offered to escort them. Ava, for once, didn't protest. The silence in the car wasn't awkward. It was the silence of people who had survived something unspeakable and needed no words to remember. When the tires crunched over the frozen gravel of the driveway and the cabin came into view, Daniel saw it for what it was. Small, weather-beaten, but lived in. A porch light still hung from a rusted chain. The swing on the front deck had been blown sideways by the storm, and it creaked softly as the wind stirred again. Ava opened the front door, and the warmth inside rolled out like breath after a long swim. The air smelled faintly of pine, cinnamon, and something older, the scent of home. But it was the little things that made Arya stop in the doorway. The crayon drawings still taped to the wall, the paper stars she'd made last month, hanging slightly tilted from the ceiling. Her little green backpack, slumped beside the shoe rack, still unzipped, one boot sticking halfway out. And the dinner plate, on the counter, her favorite mac and cheese, slightly burnt around the edges untouched, covered in plastic wrap. Daniel caught the way Ava's hand tightened briefly on the doorknob before she stepped inside and turned on the light. Arya didn't say anything. She walked slowly into the living room and climbed onto the couch where the blanket she loved was still balled into the corner, as if she'd only just left it. Leo followed. He tried to jump up but couldn't reach, so Daniel helped him with one hand, setting him down gently beside Arya. The little dog crawled immediately into her lap, and that's where he stayed. Kodiak walked the perimeter of the room like he was clearing a scene, then finally lay down by the front door, his massive form taking up nearly the whole entryway. He watched without watching, always alert, always near. Ava moved through the house quietly, lighting a few candles, pulling curtains open. When she passed by the dining table, she picked up a small stuffed lamb from one of the chairs. It had fallen during the storm, likely knocked over by wind or panic. She dusted it off gently and placed it in Arya's arms. The little girl held it, without a word. Daniel stood near the fireplace, rubbing his sore shoulder. "I left everything the way it was," Ava said suddenly, her voice low. "I couldn't change it. I thought if I did, it would mean I believed she wasn't coming back." Daniel didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "Maybe leaving it was your way of hoping." Ava nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Quinn had slipped in earlier with a small bag of supplies for Arya, a thermos of warm soup, a bottle of cough medicine, and a hand-knitted scarf that matched Leo's ridiculous sweater. She kissed Arya's forehead and whispered something before stepping out again into the snow, leaving the family to rediscover each other. Later, as the fireplace crackled and dusk melted into evening, Ava made tea. She offered Daniel a mug, and they sat not across from each other, but side by side. Arya eventually fell asleep on the couch. Leo pressed tightly into her side, his head rising and falling with her breathing. One of her drawings, a bright sun above a crooked house with a dog standing proudly outside, fluttered slightly in the heater's breeze. Kodiak still hadn't moved, but when Daniel reached down and gently scratched behind his ear, the dog closed his eyes, just for a moment. "I never asked you why you went down that road," Ava said, her voice quiet. Daniel stared into the fire. Kodiak stopped. Just stopped. "He never does that. I trusted him." A pause. "And when we found her," he stopped, swallowing hard. "When I saw her, I saw my brother's little girl. The one I never met." Ava didn't reply, but her hand found his on the couch and rested there. Not clasping, just knowing. Outside, the wind rose again, not in warning, but in return. The scent of cinnamon and warm maple drifted out of the old brick building on the corner of Pine Street, curling through the morning air like a gentle invitation. A small wooden sign hung over the entrance, hand-painted with faded gold lettering that read, "Maple and Hearth." The windows were always a little fogged from the ovens inside, but the light, soft and golden, poured through like honey. It wasn't a big place. 4 tables, 1 long counter, and shelves lined with old jars of preserves and chipped ceramic mugs that didn't match but somehow belonged together. A chalkboard above the register offered the day's specials, spiced apple crumble in Ava's neat, looping script. But what truly stopped people on the street wasn't the pastries. It was the sign taped to the window. Drawn in the crayon strokes of a child's small hand, it read, "Meet Leo, the snow hero, M." Next to the sign sat a little girl with sunlight in her hair and a bandage still faintly visible beneath her sleeve. Arya's feet swung just above the floor as she sat on a tall stool. One hand curled gently around the tiny shepherd puppy curled up beside her. Leo wore a small blue bandana someone had given him, embroidered with snowflakes, and the word "brave" stitched in careful thread. Each morning, the regulars would come in for muffins or black coffee and leave with soft smiles, not because of what they bought, but because of what they saw. A girl once lost to winter, now radiant in the morning light, holding her tiny miracle like a secret the world had almost missed. Kodiak stopped by almost every afternoon. He'd nudge the bell on the bakery door open with his big head and wait for permission before padding in. Ava would hand him a small piece of oat biscuit, and Arya would run to wrap her arms around his thick neck. Leo would bounce clumsily behind, tail wagging like a tiny metronome of joy. Daniel came too. At first, just to check on Kodiak, or so he said. He'd stand awkwardly near the counter, nodding hello, asking if the big shepherd was behaving. But he never left without something in a paper bag, and he always seemed to linger when Arya told him what new name she'd given the sourdough starter this week. Eventually, he stopped pretending it was only about the dog. He liked the way the light fell across the flour-dusted counter. He liked Ava's quiet laugh when Arya told her that Leo now barked in his sleep. He liked the way the town, once indifferent and gray, began to lean in. Because stories, when whispered through warm bread and coffee steam, tend to travel. And so they did. It began with a local high school teacher who stopped in one Saturday and heard the tale while sipping on a cinnamon scone. By Monday, her students had drawn pictures of Arya and Leo standing atop snowy hills like champions. One even taped a copy to the post office window. Then came the church ladies, who insisted on hosting a Snow Angels bake sale with proceeds going toward new blankets for lost pets. A man from the volunteer fire department brought over a small space heater. "Just in case little Leo needs it," he'd said, eyes misty. Someone from the local paper showed up with a camera and took a photo of Arya's crayon sign. When it ran with the headline, "Hero Found in the Snow," the phones in the bakery rang for 2 days straight. People didn't just want pastries, they wanted to see the girl and the puppy who survived the storm. But not all visitors came for sugar or stories. Some came quiet, like Daniel once had, carrying their own frozen grief, not knowing what they were looking for, until they looked through the bakery window and saw her. A girl who lived, a puppy who stayed, and a dog named Kodiak, who watched the door like a sentinel, guarding something more than just people guarding the second chances. One afternoon, Ava found Daniel standing outside, staring at the sign in the window. He was in uniform, though his posture was relaxed. One hand resting near his belt, the other curled with a coffee cup going cold. "You ever think about how it could have gone?" he asked, without turning. "All the time," Ava said gently. He nodded. "I keep wondering if it wasn't for Kodiak." His voice trailed off. Ava joined him at the window. Inside, Arya was giggling as Leo tried to chew on a wooden spoon twice his size. Kodiak lay beneath her stool, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but always listening. "I think miracles happen quietly," she said after a moment. "Like snow falling at night. You don't see it right away, but in the morning it's there." Daniel looked at her, really looked this time. "Is that what this place is for? Catching the quiet ones?" She smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just a place for people who almost gave up." They stood like that for a while, no need to fill the silence. Inside, Arya pressed her hand to the window, her fingers leaving small prints in the glass. Daniel lifted his hand, met hers through the glass. Leo barked once, high-pitched and hopeful. And for a moment, on that ordinary Tuesday in a bakery no one had noticed before, it felt like the whole town took one collective, healing breath. The day's warmth still clung to the bakery walls, the ghost of cinnamon and rising dough lingering long after the last customer had gone. Outside, Main Street lay hushed beneath a dusting of new snow, storefronts dark except for the yellow porch light that burned over maple and hearth like a small, steadfast star. Ava locked the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and turned off the neon coffee mug that usually blinked in the window. Inside, the overhead lights were dimmed, leaving only the low glow of sconces along the brick wall and the faint orange shimmer coming from the industrial ovens cooling for the night. Daniel sat at the corner table, the one Arya liked best, nursing a chipped mug of chamomile. Kodiak lay at his feet, tail thumping lazily each time Ava glanced over. On the bar, Leo slept in a woven basket lined with an old flannel shirt, his soft puppy breaths rising and falling like a tiny bellows. Ava joined Daniel, setting her own cup down. She'd traded her flour-dusted apron for a thick cardigan, sleeves pushed to her elbows, dark hair tied back loosely. She exhaled, letting the quiet settle over them. "Bakery's never this calm," she murmured, half smiling. Daniel leaned back, one arm in a proper sling now after the hospital visit earlier that week. Hard to believe, an hour ago, this place was all coffee orders and second-grade field trip questions about the heroic puppy. "I best—" Ava chuckled soft, a little tired. "I like the noise. But nights like this matter too." Silence unfurled between them. Not empty full, like bread rising. Daniel traced the rim of his mug with one finger. Ava watched the steam curl up and vanish. After a moment he said, "I used to hate quiet," his voice barely above the gentle tick of the wall clock. "When it's loud, you can hide in the chaos. Can't think about what you lost." Ava didn't rush him. She sipped her tea, waited. "My sister's name was Maggie." He kept his eyes on the mug. "She disappeared in a blizzard when I was 16. We were sledding. Storm came in fast. I turned around and she was just gone. Search teams looked for days, never found her." A faint tremor rippled through his words. The wind sounded exactly like that storm outside tonight. Ava's hand drifted across the table, stopping just short of touching his. "You kept going. Didn't feel like I did." He exhaled shakily. "I became a cop because I couldn't save her. Thought maybe I'd atone by saving someone else." He lifted his gaze at last, eyes reflecting oven glow and something roar. "Arya. She's the first child I've carried out of a storm alive." The admission hung between them, fragile as spun sugar. Ava swallowed, her throat tight. "I never told you about Ethan." Daniel shook his head gently. "You don't have to." "I want to." She stared at the dark window, snow swirling beyond like silent confetti. "He played piano in the evenings, filled our cabin with music. The night cancer finally quieted him. The house felt so loud with silence, I almost couldn't breathe." She wrapped her fingers around the mug. I baked a loaf of honey bread at 3 a.m. The smell filled every corner, made the house feel alive again. That's why this bakery exists, to trade silence for warmth. Daniel studied her for a long beat. Does it work? Most days. She managed a small smile. But grief is tricky. You don't cure it. You share it until the burden feels less lonely. Kodiak stirred, lifting his head to rest it on Daniel's boot. The big shepherd's eyes flicked from him to Ava, as if gently corralling their words together. Daniel reached down, scratching behind Kodiak's ear. Seems my partner agrees. Ava's gaze softened. He sees hearts the way bakers see dough, knows when something needs more time, more warmth. Another quiet moment. The bakery's thermostat clicked. Pipes hummed softly. Outside, headlights swept by once. Then darkness returned. Ava slid her hand across the table, this time letting her fingertips brush Daniel's knuckles. Not insistence, just presence. I don't know what comes next, she said, voice a thread of sincerity. For Arya, for Leo, for us. But I do know the storm passed and we're still here. Daniel turned his palm upward, gently enclosing her hand. His touch was careful, as if testing the reality of connection after so much cold. For the first time in years, he said, I'm grateful for the quiet. They stayed like that, hands entwined, silence breathing around them. Not the silence of absence, the silence of two people who had carried loss to the brink and found, on the other side, a sliver of something tender, a hush that soothed instead of suffocating. Leo stirred in his basket, letting out a tiny yip in his sleep. Kodiak responded with a soft chuff, settling again. Ava chuckled, wiping at the corner of her eye with her free hand. Small miracles. Daniel squeezed her fingers gently, and maybe room for bigger ones. They didn't need more words. The ticking clock, the cooling ovens, the hush of falling snow outside, these were enough conversation for one night. Together they rose, refilled each other's mugs, and washed the day from the counters in companionable silence. When the last light was dimmed and the lock turned, Daniel walked Ava to the doorway of her upstairs apartment above the bakery. Kodiak padded up the stairs after Arya's soft sleep whispers, Leo toddling close behind. Daniel paused on the landing, snow-frosted night pressed against the window. Ava turned, her silhouette framed by the warm hallway light. Thanks for staying, she whispered. He met her eyes, a faint curve at the edge of his mouth, something almost like peace. Thanks for letting me. Ava leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek. No promises, no pressure, just gratitude, shared warmth, and the quiet surety that neither faced the winter alone anymore. When Daniel stepped back into the night, the cold felt different, less like a threat, more like a reminder of what had been overcome. He looked up. Clouds had parted, stars glittering crisp and clean above Eversnow. Kodiak brushed his leg, amber eyes reflecting starlight. Yeah, buddy, Daniel murmured, sliding a hand through thick fur. We're going to be okay. And in the hush of Maple and Hearth's sleeping ovens, two battered hearts found room for rest, baked into the slow, patient heat of trust. Daniel's breath caught as the drawing came into view. It was a winter scene, simple but full of heart. 4 figures standing together under falling snow, Arya in her purple coat, Leo curled in her arms, Kodiak sitting tall, and Daniel in his uniform, all huddled close as if the storm itself couldn't touch them. At the bottom, in Arya's uneven handwriting, were the words, "You found my heart." For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. The lump in his throat tightened as the meaning sank in. He looked up at Arya, her breath fogging the air, her eyes wide and unsure. Arya, he said softly, this is beautiful. I don't think anyone's ever given me something like this before. She shifted from foot to foot, cheeks pinker than the cold alone could explain. I thought, maybe if you ever feel like it's too cold again, you could look at it, so you don't forget the good part of the snow. Daniel's hand trembled slightly as he brushed his thumb over the crayon strokes. Trust me, kiddo. I'll never forget. Not because of this. Not because of you. Ava stepped out of the bakery, wiping her hands on her apron. She paused, watching the scene with a quiet smile that spoke volumes, soft pride, relief, maybe something deeper. Leo bounded back to her side, leaving tiny paw prints in the snow, while Arya stood there, looking at Daniel as if he'd hung the stars above them. Daniel rose and carefully folded the drawing. "You know," he said, crouching to meet her eye again, "sometimes I think I'm the one who got saved that night, not you." Arya tilted her head, curious. "But you're the one who found us." "Yeah," he said, glancing at Kodiak sitting alert in the car. "But you and Leo, you reminded me that not everything's lost. You showed me how to start again." For a beat, the winter night seemed to hold its breath. Then Arya threw her arms around him. It wasn't a long hug, just tight enough, warm enough to cut through something inside him that had been frozen for far too long. Daniel swallowed hard, resting a hand on her back. "Thank you," he whispered. When she let go, she grinned. "You should put it somewhere special." He opened the car door and taped the drawing right on the dashboard, where the streetlights lit it softly. "Perfect," he said. "Now I can see it every time I drive." Ava approached, her breath swirling in the cold air. "She worked on that for hours," she said quietly. "I think she wanted to give you more than just a picture. She gave me something I didn't know I needed." Daniel replied, his voice low. "A reminder that the hard days don't get to win." Ava's gaze lingered on him, warm and steady. "You deserve that reminder," she said. "We all do." Daniel smiled, a small, real smile. "You coming home now?" Ava nodded, wrapping an arm around Arya's shoulders. "We'll lock up and meet you there. Kodiak looks like he's ready for bed anyway." The shepherd, hearing his name, gave a soft chuff of agreement, tail tapping against the seat. Daniel glanced at Arya one last time. "Good night, Snow Angel." "Good night," she said, smiling so wide it felt like the whole street brightened. As they walked back inside, Daniel started the engine, the warm hum filling the quiet night. He touched the drawing lightly, the words, "You found my heart," glowing in the dashboard light, and felt a sense of peace settle over him, a kind he hadn't known in years. His breath caught. The drawing depicted a simple but vivid scene beneath soft white snowfall. Arya had captured 4 figures standing close together: a little girl in a purple coat holding a small puppy, a tall man in a blue uniform, and a German shepherd with watchful eyes and a steady stance. Around them, snowflakes fell softly, each one drawn carefully in varying shades of blue and silver. Below the image, in Arya's gentle handwriting, were the words, "You found my heart." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight with something deeper than gratitude. His voice came out quieter than intended. "Arya, this is beautiful." She shifted shyly from foot to foot. "I thought maybe you could keep it so you don't forget about the night you saved us." He looked up, meeting her earnest gaze. "Trust me, I'll never forget." She seemed pleased, nodding solemnly. "Mama says sometimes grown-ups forget good things because they remember the bad things harder." Daniel glanced toward the bakery. Ava stood in the doorway, leaning quietly against the frame, a soft smile on her face, watching the interaction unfold. Leo had wandered back toward her, paws now covered in powdery snow. He returned his attention to Arya. "Well, thanks to this," he gently tapped the drawing, "I don't think I'll ever lose the good parts." She hugged him impulsively, a quick, tight embrace. "Good." The moment broke softly as she ran back toward Ava, who caught her in another hug. Leo hopped happily around their feet, his tiny barks muffled by the snow. Daniel stood, brushing his pants off slowly, the paper still held delicately in one hand. Kodiak watched him closely from the open patrol car door, eyes deep and knowing. Sliding back behind the wheel, Daniel glanced again at the drawing under the dim interior light. Carefully, he took a piece of clear tape from the glove compartment and pressed the drawing gently to the inside of his windshield, just above the dashboard. The streetlights outside illuminated the colors, making them glow softly. "You found my heart," he repeated softly to himself. In the quiet, Daniel's mind drifted back to another night, another storm, the memory of Maggie's laughter mingling with the sharp bite of regret. But now, alongside that familiar pain, was something new, something softer. Arya's words echoed gently, warm and soothing. Kodiak shifted slightly behind him, letting out a low, contented sigh. Daniel glanced into the rearview mirror, meeting his loyal partner's amber gaze. "You know something, buddy?" Daniel said softly, adjusting the drawing slightly. "She might be right. Maybe it's time we started remembering the good a little harder." Kodiak chuffed quietly, a gentle sound of approval. The bakery lights dimmed at last. Ava stepped outside, locking the door behind her. Daniel watched her gather Arya and Leo into her arms, laughter and whispers lost to the wind. Ava lifted a hand in a gentle wave as they headed upstairs to their apartment, the warmth of family and newfound peace trailing behind them. Daniel waited a moment longer before pulling away, snowflakes whispering softly across the windshield. Through them, the drawing seemed to come alive, the crayon snowflakes mingling perfectly with the real ones. He found himself smiling faintly, a soft glow filling the hollow space within him. As he turned down the street, passing the community center, he recalled the hesitant smiles of the kids earlier that day, the way Arya's quiet bravery had broken through their fears. He remembered Mateo's gentle laughter, Kaylee's shy trust in Kodiak, and the way small miracles seemed to ripple outward from that single night in the storm. The drawing remained steady, glowing gently beneath the streetlights, a quiet reminder of hope and courage. When he parked at his small home later that night, he glanced once more at the crayon picture. The simple figures stood bravely beneath the snow, each flake drawn carefully with a child's earnestness, a reminder that storms, no matter how fierce, couldn't erase kindness. "You found my heart," he whispered again. He turned off the engine, leaving the drawing taped securely to the windshield. Daniel sat quietly in the darkness for a long moment, listening to Kodiak's steady breathing, feeling something shift deep within him. Perhaps, he realized softly, Arya's words held more truth than even she understood. For the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel felt not only the familiar sting of loss, but also the gentle warmth of new beginnings. Somewhere out in the falling snow, the lights of Maple and Hearth remained a soft glow, beckoning him homeward. And inside his chest, quietly, gently, something long buried began to thaw. The frost was loosening its grip. It wasn't quite spring yet, but something in the light had changed. The sky no longer carried the weight of winter. Instead, it shimmered with the soft promise of warmth just beneath the horizon. Patches of earth began to show through the melting snow in the backyard of Maple and Hearth, damp and dark and full of potential. Arya knelt beside a small hole she had helped dig earlier that morning, her mittened hands cradling a tiny sapling, a sugar maple, no more than a few inches tall, roots still dusted with soft soil. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, lips pressed together in that serious expression children wear when they know something matters. Daniel stood a few feet away, leaning on the wooden fence, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. Ava stood beside him, a hand resting gently on his arm, her eyes watching her daughter and something else with quiet reverence. "This was her idea," Ava said softly, nodding toward the child. "She told me yesterday. Snow can't last forever. Something has to grow." Daniel looked at the sapling in her hands, then at the thawing yard where remnants of winter still lingered in corners. "She's right," he murmured. Arya gently placed the little tree into the ground, careful not to bend its tender trunk. Kodiak lay just a few feet away on a patch of dry grass, his large body relaxed, head resting on his paws, ears flicking every now and then at the sound of birdsong. His breathing was steady, rhythmic, as if even he understood the significance of this moment. Daniel stepped closer and crouched beside Arya, picking up the small tin watering can she'd brought with her. He held it out. "Ready?" She nodded, her curls bouncing beneath her knitted hat. "Ready." Together, they tilted the can, letting the lukewarm water drizzle over the roots and the soft dirt. The earth drank it in quickly, as if starved for life. Arya patted the soil gently around the base of the tree, then pressed both hands flat against it like a quiet blessing. "Do you think it'll grow?" she asked, not looking up. Ava stepped forward and knelt on the other side. "I think it already has, sweetheart." Arya looked between them. "I want it to be strong, so even if it gets cold again, it won't give up." Daniel felt something rise in his chest, not the sharp ache he'd carried for so long, but something gentler, something that didn't hurt to feel. He reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Arya's ear. "Trees are stubborn that way," he said. "They dig deep, they hold on, even when everything around them freezes." Arya turned toward Kodiak then, her voice softer. "He's like a tree." Daniel followed her gaze. The big shepherd hadn't moved, just lifted his eyes to meet hers, tail giving one slow thump against the ground. His breath fogged in the cool air, but his body was still, grounded, peaceful. "I think you're more like a tree than you know," Daniel said. Arya smiled faintly. "Then maybe we match." Ava stood and brushed the dirt from her knees, watching as Daniel helped Arya to her feet. The three of them stood in silence, gazing down at the small tree, barely a sprout against the backdrop of an awakening world. Around them, the snow was in retreat, puddling in the low corners, dripping from the eaves, surrendering to the warmth of earth and sun. Birds began returning to the bare branches above, tentative in song but louder with each passing day. Kodiak let out a deep exhale and rolled onto his side. One paw stretched lazily toward the sun. His fur shimmered with flecks of old snow, and his eyes closed slowly, content. Daniel turned to Ava, voice low but certain. "I think I needed this." She looked at him, really looked, and nodded. "Me too." He wasn't sure if she meant the tree, or the child, or the slow melting of something long frozen between them. But either way, he understood. The moment held, fragile and full. Then Arya reached for his hand, small fingers wrapping around two of his, and tilted her head up toward him. "Can we name it?" He blinked. "The tree?" He considered that, glancing at Ava, who shrugged with a smile. "I suppose we could," Daniel replied. "Do you have a name in mind?" Arya thought for a moment, eyes scanning the air, as if catching words on the wind. Then she whispered, "Hope." Daniel looked down at the sapling, and somehow, it fit perfectly. Later that afternoon, after Arya had gone inside to warm up, Daniel stayed out in the yard for a while. He sat on the old wooden bench beside Kodiak, who remained sprawled in the grass, breathing deep, his ears twitching at the distant sound of Ava laughing in the kitchen. Daniel watched the little maple tree sway gently in the breeze, its slender frame catching the sunlight, and he realized something. It wasn't just a tree. It was a beginning, a root in the soil, a root in him. Maybe healing didn't always come in the rush of sirens or the roar of storms. Maybe it came like this, slow, tender, and quietly persistent. Maybe it came with dirt under your fingernails and a child's voice saying, "He stayed with me. He never left." Daniel closed his eyes, leaned back, and let the sun find his face. And in that warmth, just beneath the surface of things, something inside him began to grow. The snow had returned, not the ferocious, biting storm that once consumed their nights, but soft and hesitant, whispering instead of screaming. It drifted through the air, frosting the tips of the maple sapling in the yard like sugar. Inside the bakery, the scent of cinnamon lingered as Ava hummed by the sink. Daniel was refilling Kodiak's water bowl when a sharp, panicked breath cut through the stillness. He turned to see Arya frozen at the glass door, fingers pressed white against the frame, eyes wide and unblinking, as if the snow itself had come alive. "Arya?" he said gently. No response. Her breathing quickened, and she backed into the wall with a soft whimper. Daniel crouched beside her. "It's okay. You're safe. You're inside." But she wasn't here, not fully. Trauma doesn't knock before entering. Her pupils were dilated, her body stiff, trembling from memory, not cold. Then Kodiak moved. The shepherd rose with steady grace and pressed his body against Arya's legs, leaning into her without a sound. She flinched at first, then clung to his fur like a lifeline. Her breath remained fast, but fear softened into recognition. Daniel waited, letting silence ground them. Finally, she whispered, "I couldn't move." "You don't have to," Daniel said quietly. "I thought it was that night again. The cold, the snow. I heard the wind and I wasn't here anymore." That happens," Daniel explained softly. "Your body remembers, even when you're safe." "Is it bad that I'm scared?" "No, sweetheart. It means your heart's still working." She looked at him, confused. He smiled gently. "Only the brave get scared like that. It means you survived." Her lip trembled as she reached for his sleeve. Trust doesn't always need words. "Do you want to name it?" he asked. "Name what?" "That scared feeling. Sometimes naming it makes it smaller," she thought. "It's like a shadow. Quiet, but loud in my head. What if we call it the quiet shadow?" Daniel suggested. "And when it comes, you say, 'I see you, but I'm not alone.'" Her grip tightened on Kodiak. "I have him," she said firmly. "And me," Daniel added. She smiled, fragile but real. Outside, the snow fell softly, no longer a threat, but just weather. Inside, warmth outweighed the cold. Arya leaned against the wall, Kodiak pressed to her side. Daniel stayed with them, until her breathing evened. "I think I want to go outside again," she whispered. "Now?" he asked. She nodded. "But only if he comes too." Kodiak's tail thumped. Daniel extended his hand. "Then let's meet the snow on our terms." And together the girl, the man, and the dog who saved them both stepped into the quiet flurry. This time, they stayed. The stars were clear that night, the sky sewn thick with constellations above the woods behind Maple and Hearth. Ava spread a blanket near the porch. Arya sat between her and Daniel, mittened hands wrapped around warm cider. Her cheeks were red from laughing at Kodiak's clumsy attempts to catch snowflakes. The shepherd now lay with his head on Daniel's knee, eyes half-lidded, peaceful as though a long-held weight had finally settled. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded, yellowed letter. "To M, from your stubborn brother." Ava noticed. "What's that?" "A letter I wrote 12 years ago," he said quietly. "To Emily. I never sent it. Maybe I thought mailing it would mean she was really gone." Arya's eyes reflected the stars as Daniel unfolded the paper. The sound of old creases filled the silence. "Hey, Em, it's snowing today. You always said snow made the world quieter, not empty, but full. I miss waking up to your humming. I hated it then. I miss it now. Found one of your books in the attic. Syrup stain on page 12. I laughed so hard I cried. Sometimes I think about the last thing I said to you. Something stupid about my flashlight. That was our last fight. Then, the mountain took you. I joined the force a year later. Thought if I saved enough people, I'd earn forgiveness. Truth is, I'm still trying. If you're somewhere with light, warmth, and bad hot chocolate, I hope you know I'm trying to be someone you'd be proud of. Love, Daniel." The final words lingered like a fading note. No one spoke. Arya quietly slipped her hand into Daniel's. "You would have liked her," Daniel said, voice rough. "She was brave and smart, built bird feeders out of milk jugs, named every worm she found." "Like me?" Arya whispered. "Exactly like you," he said, smiling faintly. Kodiak pressed closer, anchoring Daniel in the moment. Ava wiped her cheek. "You've kept that letter all this time?" Daniel nodded. "I wasn't ready to read it aloud until now." He folded it carefully and slipped it into Arya's coat pocket. "So, it doesn't get lost again. And so someone who understands can keep it safe." "I won't let it blow away," she promised. "I know," he said softly. Under the stars, with memory and snow around them, they sat in quiet understanding. Somehow, the cold didn't feel cold anymore. The bakery was closed. No cinnamon scent drifting to the sidewalk, just the quiet sweep of Ava's broom and an old tune humming from the radio. Daniel stepped in, Kodiak lying content on the porch, as though he'd always belonged there. Inside, the warmth felt like home, simple, steady, asking nothing but presence. Ava looked up from the back table, apron dusted with flour. "You're early." "Didn't feel like sitting at the station," Daniel replied. "Figured Kodiak might score a scone." Her eyes crinkled with a quiet smile. She reached into a brown bag and pulled out a loaf of fresh bread, still warm. Wrapping it in a cloth napkin, she handed it to him. The slip of paper was tucked beneath the twine. Daniel opened it. "You can stop punishing yourself now. You saved her, Ava." His fingers trembled. The note wasn't dramatic, but it cracked open something long rusted shut. "I didn't think I needed to hear that," he admitted. "But you did," Ava said softly. He looked up. Her eyes held no pity, only a quiet offering, like the bread itself. "I've carried guilt for so long. I forgot what it feels like not to," Daniel confessed. "You didn't lose Emily because you were bad," Ava said firmly. "And you didn't save Arya because you were good. You were simply there, and you didn't turn away. That's what matters." He hesitated, voice breaking. "What if I'd been too late? What if—" "But you weren't," she cut in. "She's alive. Leo is alive. And so are you." "Oh." Daniel swallowed hard. Ava stepped closer and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. For the first time in years, he didn't flinch. Not because he expected it, but because something inside him had stopped bracing for pain. "You don't have to be haunted forever," she whispered. "Sometimes the ghosts go when we stop feeding them." Daniel nodded slowly, taking her flour-dusted hand and holding it just a moment longer than necessary. The door jingled softly as Kodiak padded in, tail wagging low. Ava smiled. "Come on, big guy. I saved a cheddar biscuit just for you." Daniel paused at the doorway, bread warm against his chest. "You don't know what that note meant to me." "Maybe not," Ava said. "But I meant every word. Would it be all right if I came by tomorrow?" Her smile deepened. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." Daniel stepped into the fading light, the wind carrying a final trace of cinnamon. Kodiak followed, glancing back once, as if to say, "Healing doesn't roar. It arrives with flower-streaked hands, a folded note, and the quiet courage to receive what we've spent years denying ourselves." The wind turned bitter again that night, a sharp, whispering cold that slipped through windows no matter how tightly sealed. Taro pines slept beneath a hush of frost, stars hidden behind low gray clouds. Inside the home behind maple and hearth, only one lamp glowed beside Arya's bed. She hadn't moved in hours, her hand resting on Leo's trembling body. His nose was dry, too warm, his breathing shallow. "Is he going to die again?" she whispered. Kodiak sat silently at her side, his large frame dark against the wall. Then he let out a single, soft howl, a sound that was less a plea than a prayer. "I'm here," Arya murmured, leaning into Leo's fur. "I won't leave you." From the next room, Daniel stirred. He had fallen asleep with a book on his chest, but that sound, Kodiak's howl, cut through his sleep like a memory. He crossed the hallway barefoot, heart tight with dread. Ava stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. "The clinic line's dead," she said. "The storm's interfering again." One look at Leo told Daniel everything. The fever was worse. "Arya," he said gently, kneeling by her, "we need to get Leo to a vet. Fast. Don't let him die." "I won't," he said, though panic clawed at him. "I know someone," Ava added. "She's not a vet, but she works with the clinic south side. Hem." Minutes later, Leo was bundled in a fleece-lined tote, wrapped in warm towels. Arya clutched him as if letting go meant losing him forever. Kodiak climbed into the back seat, bracing her like a silent guardian. Just as Daniel started the patrol car, headlights cutting the dark, a knock came at the window. It was Mr. Branning, their elderly neighbor, wrapped in his olive green coat and fingerless gloves. "You're going out in this?" "Puppy's sick," Daniel explained. "Clinic's closed." My truck's got chains," Branning said. "You'll need them." Soon they were barreling down snow-crusted roads in Branning's old Ford. In the back seat, Arya hummed a shaky lullaby to Leo, fingers stroking his ears. Kodiak didn't move, his eyes fixed on every shallow breath. When the cabin finally appeared, a faint lantern of light in the snow, Daniel was out of the truck before it stopped. The door opened to Ruth, a grizzled woman in her 52nd with silver in her hair and a St. Bernard snoring behind her. One glance at Leo, and she waved them in. "No time for talk," she said. "Lay him here. Let's work." The room smelled of iodine and hay. Heat lamps glowed over a small station, and Ruth moved with the steady hands of someone who had saved too many lives to count. Arya stood near the table, clutching Daniel's sleeve, eyes asking questions her lips couldn't form. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her still. Kodiak lay close by, watching, waiting. The only sounds were the pulse oximeter's beep and the slow drip of saline, quiet, steady, sacred. The storm passed before midnight, leaving a world washed clean. The sky cleared into a sheet of glass, moonlight turning the snow and pines silver. Inside, Leo lay wrapped in a heated blanket, his breathing even, his fever broken. Ruth had gone to rest in the back room. Ava and Branning slept on the couch, exhaustion finally catching them. Arya sat on a low stool beside Leo, arms wrapped around her knees. Her eyelids drooped, but she refused to move. Daniel sat quietly at her side. "He's strong," Daniel murmured. "He's here because of you." Arya blinked slowly. "If I never got found, Leo would have stayed." The words weren't a question, just truth. Her voice wavered as she added, "He stayed, even when it hurt him. He stayed. For me." Daniel's throat tightened. He thought of his sister, of how he hadn't stayed, how fire and regret had left him with nothing but guilt. But Arya had held on, and Leo had stayed, not out of training, but loyalty. Now he understood why Kodiak had led him through that storm, why none of this was random. "Arya," he said, voice raw, What Leo did. What you both did. That's love. The kind that doesn't walk away. Her eyes shimmered. She leaned against him, small and warm. Daniel hesitated, then wrapped his arms around her, not as a hero, but as someone who finally allowed himself to stay. It wasn't a dramatic hug, just steady. Like moonlight falling on snow without asking anything in return. For the first time since her rescue, Arya leaned into someone else's heartbeat. No one spoke. Even Kodiak was silent. Daniel closed his eyes. Forgiveness, he realized, doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it's a little girl whispering truth in the dark. Sometimes it's a dog that never left. And sometimes it's realizing you're allowed to come home. The next morning, the sky was a brilliant winter blue, the kind that felt like a deep breath after months of holding one. Main Street was shut down, folding chairs lining the sidewalks, white streamers tied to lampposts. Children waved paper flags with paw prints. A hand-painted banner stretched across Town Hall. Thank you, Leo, Kodiak, our guardians in the storm. It wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. Daniel stood at the platform's edge in his patrol uniform, Kodiak beside him. Not in his vest today, just himself, ears perked, eyes scanning the crowd as if understanding that something sacred was happening. Across the stage, Dr. Eleanor Finch and Nurse Quinn stood proudly. Ruth wiped her glasses with the edge of her scarf, trying to hide her tears. Then Arya appeared, hand wrapped around Ava's. The crowd fell silent. Her braid was uneven, her coat patched but clean, the same one she'd been found in. In her arms, Leo lay bundled in a wool blanket. Brighter now, stronger. A deputy stepped forward with two small wooden boxes. One was handed to Daniel, the other to Ava. Inside each lay a medal, etched with snowflakes and paw prints, ringed by a laurel wreath and the words, "For loyalty beyond words." Daniel crouched, clipping the medal onto Kodiak's collar. The old shepherd pressed his head into Daniel's shoulder. A silent thank you. Ava knelt beside Arya, attaching the second medal to Leo's tiny harness. The pup gave a soft yawn and curled closer. The mayor approached the microphone, but Arya's voice interrupted softly. I want to say something. The microphone lowered to her height. She unfolded a crumpled note, its edges torn from Daniel's patrol pad. Sometimes, she read, heroes are big and loud, but sometimes they're small. Sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes they don't wear badges or speak words. Her voice cracked, but she went on. But they stay. They stay when it's cold. They stay when you're scared. They stay even when you don't ask them to. And that's how you know they're heroes. A hush swept through the square, followed by soft, steady applause. Soon, the whole crowd was standing, not roaring, but clapping like a prayer. Daniel's eyes burned as he looked at Arya. She turned to him, arms tightening around Leo. He crouched and opened an arm. She leaned in without hesitation. Ava stepped beside them, hand resting on Daniel's back. On the other side, Kodiak nudged Arya's elbow, his medal glinting in the pale sunlight. The mayor spoke of courage and community, but few heard the words. What lingered was the girl, the dog, and the quiet truth that echoed through the crowd. Heroes aren't measured in size or noise. They're measured in presence, in staying. After the storm, what saves us isn't thunder or wind, but the heartbeat we didn't know we were listening for. The loyalty that never left. The smell of pancakes always came before the light. Warm and steady, it drifted down the narrow hallway of Ava's cabin like a promise maple, browned butter, and a hint of cinnamon. Coffee simmered in the old tin percolator, clicking quietly on the stove. Outside, snow was retreating, the wind losing its teeth. Spring was still weeks away, but the season was shifting. Inside, Ava flipped the last pancake with practiced ease, moving at a Sunday pace. At the table, Arya sat cross-legged, a foil and muffin liner crown perched on her braid. She hummed softly to Leo, who sprawled across her lap, tail wagging lazily. Daniel stood at the sink, drying the same mug twice. Kodiak, ever the watchful sentinel, lay curled near the wood stove. The fire's glow cast orange halos across the walls. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" Ava asked, setting a plate in front of Arya and pouring syrup. Daniel looked at her. "Here?" She nodded. "This kitchen. This peace." He considered the question. "I think I stopped believing in it. he said quietly. Ava just handed him a fork, their fingers brushing briefly. He didn't flinch. Instead, he sat beside Arya, who promptly placed Leo on his lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're sticky," Daniel noted, as she handed him a pancake shaped like a paw. "I made it for you," she said simply, leaning into his side. Leo sighed contentedly. Kodiak lifted his head as if approving, then went back to sleep. Breakfast was slow, filled with the soft clink of forks and Arya's occasional giggles once so hard that milk came out of her nose when Daniel's pancake flipping attempt landed on the dog. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it felt whole. Afterward, they bundled up and walked to the small park on the town's edge. The snow on the trail had turned slushy beneath their boots. Trees stood like silent witnesses, their branches dripping in sunlight. Arya ran ahead with Leo bounding beside her, the puppy all clumsy joy. Kodiak walked at Daniel's side, occasionally bumping his leg in that familiar, wordless way. "I'm here." Ava matched Daniel's pace, hands in pockets, scarf high on her neck. Her gaze was warm, soft, with something unspoken. "I used to walk this trail with Maddie," she said quietly. "She collected pine cones like they were treasure." Daniel glanced at her. "She would have liked Arya." "She would have loved her," Ava corrected. "Same fire. Same way of finding the good." At the lake's frozen edge, Ava leaned on the old fence, watching sunlight carve silver lines across the cracking ice. "I was angry at the world for a long time," she said. "At God, at cancer. But this," she turned to him, "we were meant to find you." Daniel met her eyes. No uniform, no badge, just a man slowly drawn back toward light. "You don't know what I've done," he murmured. "I know who you are now," she replied, resting a hand on his arm. He didn't speak, just nodded. Down the path, Arya called out, holding a pine cone. "It's shaped like a heart." Ava laughed, and Daniel smiled a smile that hurt a little, like using muscles he hadn't trusted in years. They walked toward her together, two dogs following without command. By evening, the fire burned low, shadows stretching across the hardwood floor. Outside, winter's final blush clung to the trees. Inside, warmth hummed not just from the heat, but from something deeper. Supper dishes dried on a towel. The radio played a soft tune from another decade. Kodiak slept near the hearth, chest rising and falling in time with the fire's crackle. Leo had tucked himself into the crook of Kodiak's belly, dreaming. Daniel stood watching them, still in his patrol jacket. He hadn't meant to stay late, but no one asked him to leave, and somewhere along the way, this house had stopped feeling like someone else's. Ava approached, carrying a quilted bundle. "They finished it today," she said. Daniel turned. The quilt was stitched in warm tones, chestnut, rust, pale gold. One corner bore a child's careful scrawl, "For Kodiak and Leo. Home is where you sleep safe." "Arya?" he asked. She picked the fabric. Ava smiled. "I just followed orders." Daniel knelt, placing the folded bed on the floor near the hearth. Kodiak's ears twitched, one eye opening. "Yeah, buddy," Daniel whispered, smoothing his hand along the old shepherd's spine. "It's for you." Leo stepped onto the new cushion, circled once, and flopped down with a sigh. Kodiak followed, bones creaking, his muzzle landing where Arya's words were stitched. His tail thumped once. "I think he approves," Ava said softly. Daniel rose, heart lighter than his knees. "They both do." Silence settled as they watched the dogs drift back to sleep. Footsteps padded from the hallway. Arya appeared in fleece pajamas, hair mussed, eyes heavy with sleep. She didn't speak, just curled on the rug beside the new bed, cheek resting near Leo's tiny snores. Kodiak draped a paw over her wrist. "I told them," she murmured, "that this means they're family." "Oh." Daniel brushed a hand through her hair. "They already knew." Ava sat on the couch, book in hand, but eyes fixed on them on Daniel, kneeling like someone who finally understood what it meant to stay. "I used to dream about a place like this," Arya whispered, "where it didn't snow inside." Daniel paused, realizing she wasn't speaking literally. He didn't know all she'd endured before her rescue. Some things didn't need telling to be understood. "No more cold," he said softly. She nodded. "No more hiding." Ava's smile was quiet, certain. "You're already here," it seemed to say. Daniel sat beside Arya, back against the hearth, the warmth seeping into his jacket. Kodiak rested his muzzle on his boot. Leo curled tighter. Arya's breathing steadied. And just like that fire burning low, a new bed cradling the dogs who had waited too long to belong the housemaid room. Not just for bodies, but for something more. Daniel no longer wondered where he needed to be. He was already there. The next morning was slow and golden, like syrup over snow. Frost on the windows looked like lace. Daniel stood at the sink, coffee in hand, watching snow drift lazily outside. It was March, but the mountains still wore white. The silence no longer felt lonely, just still. The creak of floorboards announced the day. Arya appeared, wrapped in a wool blanket like a cape. Her hair was tousled, her socks mismatched, but her eyes were lighter now, no longer burdened. Kodiak trailed behind her, yawning before flopping onto the rug. Daniel poured a second cup and nudged it toward her. "For the blanket queen." She giggled softly but stayed by the window, watching the snow. "I had a dream," she said after a pause. Daniel waited, letting the quiet hold. "It was snowing again," she said. "Like before, but I wasn't alone this time. You were there, Kodiak too, and Leo was jumping in the drifts like he could fly." Daniel exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. "And the cold," Arya continued. "It wasn't scary anymore. It was just quiet. Soft. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't looking for the door. I wasn't afraid I'd disappear. I knew I'd be okay. Because you were there." His throat tightened. He nodded. "Then we did it right." She climbed onto his lap, curling against his chest as if she'd always belonged there. He held her, arms steady, knowing how fragile trust could be and how sacred it was to be trusted back. Kodiak rose and pressed his head to Daniel's leg. Leo yipped in his sleep, paws twitching. Outside, snow kept falling, but it no longer felt like a memory trying to swallow them. It was just weather. Inside the cabin, where a little girl could dream of winter and still wake smiling, something had shifted. Healing had crept in quietly, one morning at a time. "I think he dreamed it too," Arya said, scratching behind Kodiak's ear. Daniel smiled through the fog in his eyes. "I think you're right." They sat like that for a long while. No rush, no ghosts knocking. Just coffee, the hush of snow, and the weight of a child who had finally made peace with the cold. Spring arrived in quiet strokes, not with the trumpet of blossoms, but with a slow retreat of snow, like a heavy blanket being folded back. The ice that once sealed the forest floor had melted into soft earth, and where silence once ruled, life stirred again. Moss peeked through dead leaves. Pine trees held drops of thaw like memories waiting to fall. The forest breathed differently now. Arya adjusted her backpack straps and looked up at Daniel with a grin. "We're almost there, right?" "Almost," he nodded. "Just a little farther." Behind them, Ava carried a small wooden sign, freshly sanded and hand-painted. She held it with both hands, not like a tool, but like a tribute, something sacred, something owed. Ahead, Kodiak trotted quietly, his gait steady but unhurried. The trail was familiar to him. It had etched itself into his bones that night. He moved with purpose, ears occasionally twitching to the side at the crackle of leaves, but his gaze never strayed far from Arya. Leo, smaller but growing fast, followed behind him in a new red harness embroidered with white thread. Leo, courage. The same trail that once held terror now held footprints that belonged to something softer. Reclaimed. Not erased, just transformed. Daniel glanced around as they passed the bent pine tree, the one he ducked under carrying Arya that night. He paused. "I remember this," he said quietly. Arya followed his gaze, then reached out and touched the trunk. Her hand was small against the rough bark, but steady. "This is where Kodiak barked, right?" He nodded. "Right before we saw your boot prints in the snow." The memory flickered between them. It didn't sting the way it used to. It was still heavy, but no longer crushing. Time had loosened its grip, or maybe trust had. They kept walking. When they reached the small clearing, the place where Daniel had first seen the crumpled pink coat and the trembling breath of a girl nearly lost to the dark, the light was different now. Sunlight filtered through the budding branches above, dappling the ground in gold and green. The air smelled like pine needles and wet soil. Life had found its way back here, slowly and without permission. Just like her, Arya stood still for a moment, absorbing it. Then she turned to Ava and reached for the wooden sign. "Can I put it in?" Ava nodded, her voice thick. Of course. They'd brought no ceremony, no crowd, just the three of them, 2 dogs, and the quiet kind of reverence that didn't need applause. Daniel handed her the small wooden stake they'd prepared. Arya knelt on the damp earth, fingers brushing the ground like she was greeting an old friend. She placed the sign gently into the soil and pressed it down until it held firm. The wood was soft and worn, with dark etching that read, "Hope was found here." There was no date, no names, just the truth. Daniel took a breath. It filled his lungs like spring wind, cool but clean. "Feels different in the daylight," he murmured. Arya stood beside him. "I think the forest remembers." Kodiak came and sat by her, resting his chin on her knee. Leo flopped down beside him, tongue out, eyes blinking slow. Ava stepped forward and laid a small sprig of lavender beside the sign. It wasn't native to the trail, but it smelled like home, like Arya's room, like the bakery, like comfort rising from an old oven. They stood there a while, no one rushing, no one talking, just letting the space breathe around them, letting the silence become something whole again. Arya looked up at Daniel. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found me?" He met her gaze, then crouched beside her, one knee in the dirt. "Sometimes," he said honestly, "but more and more, I think about what did happen instead." She didn't say anything, just reached out and held his hand. "I think," Ava said softly behind them, "places carry stories. This one needed to remember something good for once." Daniel nodded, eyes still on the sign. "It will now." Kodiak shifted and let out a low, contented grunt, a shepherd's approval. Leo mimicked him with a shorter, squeakier version, and everyone laughed. "Come on," Daniel finally said, standing. "Let's walk back before the rain rolls in." And Arya gave the sign one last look, then whispered, "Thank you, not to any one person, but to the place itself." Then they turned together, leaving behind a message carved in wood and rooted in love. A reminder that even in the coldest corners of the world, something can survive and bloom. It began with a photo, a soft morning light slanting through the bakery window. Arya in her favorite wool sweater, holding Leo in her lap. A hand-painted sign rested on the sill. "Meet Leo, the snow hero." Kodiak lay in the background near the fireplace, head on paws, one eye lazily half open as if listening to the world from the comfort of earned peace. The photo made its way into a local feature story. What started as a feel-good piece by reporter Ellie Whitman, the dog who stayed, the girl who survived, turned into something bigger, much bigger. By the end of the week, the story had traveled across state lines, then across the country, because it wasn't just about a rescue, it was about loyalty without condition, about a girl who survived the kind of silence no child should know, and a dog who'd curled beside her through the storm. It was about a man with guilt in his chest who learned that sometimes redemption comes on 4 legs. And it was about a community small, stitched together, choosing to rise around them like a blanket drawn close on a cold night. Daniel stood outside the bakery, sipping coffee from a ceramic mug with paw prints pressed into the glaze. The door jingled behind him. Ava stepped out, brushing flour from her apron. "You should see this," she said with a smile, tugging at one corner of her mouth. "We're on the front page of the Tribune, the actual paper, not just online." Daniel raised a brow. "Front page?" She nodded. "There's a photo of you with Kodiak, and Arya handing Leo a biscuit shaped like a snowflake." She held up the newspaper, and there it was, their quiet little world, now inked for strangers to read. He chuckled softly. "She's going to be famous." "She already is." A group of children passed by the window, pointing. One of them pressed their hand against the glass and waved at Leo, who, ever the ambassador of gentleness, wagged his tail without lifting his head. Kodiak gave a single thump of his tail in reply, regal as ever. Inside, the bakery buzzed not chaotically, but with warmth. The way a kitchen sounds when something's been made with intention. Butter melting on hot iron. Laughter behind the counter. A woman holding her toddler on one hip, waiting for a loaf of sourdough. The sign over the door had changed. Freshly carved, with cedar letters burned smooth. Leo and Kodiak's hearth. No one asked them to rename the bakery. It had been Ava's idea. "It's what they are," she told Daniel the night she unveiled the design. Warmth, memory, loyalty. The name had stuck. And people came not just for cinnamon rolls or bread still warm from the oven, but for what the place had become. A symbol. By the end of the month, donations to the therapy program that Aria helped inspire had tripled. The local paper ran a follow-up story titled "One Girl, Two Dogs, and a Town That Remembered How to Hope." Daniel sat in his cruiser, parked under the same pine tree where he'd once waited out a storm, holding an envelope that had arrived that morning. Inside, a check from a family in Ohio. $500 with a handwritten note. "We saw your story and cried. Our son Jack is afraid of dogs since the accident, but he asked to meet Leo. He says if Leo can save someone, maybe dogs aren't scary after all. The Brennan family." Daniel folded the letter and tucked it behind the sun visor. Some words you didn't throw away. That evening, he walked into the bakery and found Aria coloring at a table near the window, surrounded by cards from kids across the country. Some were clumsy crayon drawings of German shepherds with capes. Others simply said, "Thank you." She looked up and waved. "Guess what?" she beamed. "There's a boy from Oregon who said he wants a dog now. A real one. His mom used to be scared, but now she's not." Daniel crouched beside her chair. "You're helping a lot of people, you know that?" Aria glanced toward Leo, curled under her feet. "He helps them first." Daniel smiled. "And you tell their stories. That's just as brave." Behind the counter, Ava kneaded dough, her hands moving in rhythm. There was something timeless in the way she worked, like she was stitching the world back together, loaf by loaf. A woman entered with a teenage girl in a wheelchair. Kodiak rose immediately and walked over, lowering his head slowly. The girl reached out, tentative at first. Then she smiled. Outside, dusk began to settle. The air was cool again, but not cold. The kind of weather that whispered of seasons turning, but gently this time. Daniel stood at the door and looked back at all of it. The girl, the dogs, the warmth spilling from the hearth. Once, long ago, he'd stood in the snow holding a child who might not have made it. Now he stood in the light of something that had, not perfect, not without scars, but alive. The story had traveled far through paper, across screens, in folded letters and chalky drawings mailed from states he'd never been, but its heart remained here, in this small town where bread was baked with care, and people waved at dogs like they were family. And maybe they were. The last light of day melted through the windows of the cabin, golden and soft, stretching across the wooden floor like warm honey. Outside, the trees stood still in the hush of early spring, their bare branches outlined against a sky that held no storm, only stars waiting to bloom. Inside, the kitchen glowed. The table had been set with mismatched plates, chipped at the corners but full of character. A candle flickered at the center, its flame steady. Bread still warm from the oven rested in a linen-lined basket. Bowls of stew sent up gentle tendrils of steam that smelled of rosemary, thyme, and something deeper memory, perhaps. Aria sat between Daniel and Ava, her hands resting on the wooden edge, legs swinging beneath her chair. She was wearing a sweater with Leo's paw print stitched near the collar, a gift from one of the therapy kids. Her cheeks were still red from playing tag with Kodiak in the backyard. Leo lay at her feet, chin on her socks. Kodiak had claimed the hearth, one paw draped over the edge of the new bed. They'd made the one with his name embroidered beside Leo's. Music played faintly in the background, a scratchy old vinyl of Ella Fitzgerald that Ava had kept from her mother. It wove through the evening like an old friend, not needing to be loud to be heard. Daniel cleared his throat gently. He stood, holding up a glass of cider that caught the candlelight. His voice, when it came, wasn't grand. It didn't try to be. It was quiet, honest. "To staying," he said, his eyes meeting Ava's, then Aria's. "Even when it's hard." There was a silence after that, the kind that didn't beg to be filled. Then, Kodiak let out a single, soft bark, deep and sure. Leo's tail thumped twice against the wooden floor. Aria giggled, covering her mouth. They agree. Laughter followed, not loud, but whole. The kind that doesn't chase anything, just is. They ate slowly. Between bites, they shared small stories of that morning's walk, of a boy in the therapy group who had let Leo lick his hand for the first time, of a delivery man who cried when he saw Kodiak lying in the bakery like a king on his throne. Arya told them about a dream she'd had the night before. "We were in a boat," she said, "but it was floating on snow instead of water. Leo was steering it. And you," she looked at Daniel, "you were holding the stars in a jar." Daniel blinked. "Why?" She shrugged. "So I wouldn't be afraid of the dark." Ava's hand reached beneath the table and rested lightly on his. He didn't pull away. As the plates emptied, the light in the cabin softened further, turning amber, then dusk blue. Outside, the first stars appeared tentative, then bold. Kodiak shifted in his bed and let out a long, content sigh. Leo followed, curling into the crook behind Arya's chair, tail tucked, eyes closed. They looked like opposites, one gray and weathered, the other still new, but somehow they breathed as one. The clock ticked, slow and kind. There had been so much before. Pain, silence, loss, the snowstorm. The years Daniel had buried under duty and guilt. Ava's long grief folded into flower and morning light. Arya's wordless nights in the cold, holding on to a puppy and the last thread of hope. But here, now, there was no trace of that ache, only its lesson. "Do you think," Arya asked quietly, "that Leo knew he was saving me?" Daniel tilted his head. "I think he just stayed. Because he loved you." Ava smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind Arya's ear. "Sometimes that's the bravest thing anyone can do." They sat for a long time after that. No rush. No need to name what had been found. Daniel rose and fetched the last of the bread, breaking it into pieces for the dogs. Kodiak lifted his head slightly before accepting the offering with quiet dignity. Leo licked Daniel's fingers, then looked up at him with those wide, deep eyes that somehow always saw more. "You too," Daniel whispered, kneeling between them. "You saved a whole lot more than just one girl." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Arya's drawing, the one she'd given him months ago. It was faded now, from sun and handling. Crayon figures under snowfall. Her, Leo, Daniel, Kodiak. At the bottom, in the careful, almost hesitant script of a child rediscovering language, it still read, "You found my heart." He placed the drawing in a small wooden frame on the mantel. The candle flickered. The fire hummed low. Eventually, Arya leaned against Ava's shoulder, eyes fluttering closed. Leo stayed curled beneath her, unmoving. Daniel didn't speak. He just sat back in his chair, the weight in his chest no longer heavy, just full. The clock struck gently. Outside, an owl called once from the trees. Inside, there was warmth. A full table, a child asleep between love and safety. 2 dogs at peace, a woman who still smelled faintly of cinnamon and home, and a man who had stopped running. The storm was over. Long gone now. Not forgotten, but no longer feared. Only remembered the way you remember a chapter after you've turned the page. Daniel lifted his glass again, just once more. "To staying," he whispered. This time, no one needed to echo it. The room already knew. Some bonds are too deep for words, forged not in grand moments, but in quiet ones. A look, a touch, a bark that says, "I'm here." Stories like this remind us of the unspoken love between a person and their dog, especially a German shepherd, loyal to the last breath, gentle beneath all their strength, and always watching over us when we need it most. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a tear, maybe just the urge to hug your dog a little longer tonight, you're not alone. There's a wonderful resource I came across that helps people build even deeper trust and connection with their dogs. Nothing fancy, just thoughtful guidance rooted in kindness and understanding. I'll leave the link here if it feels right for you. No pressure at all. Sometimes, the smallest steps, a gentle walk, a softer command, a story shared can bring you even closer. Take care of your heart and theirs.